Chapter 1358. To Heaven Realm Abyss. Yi Xian was not putting on an act, he was really going to Heaven Realm Abyss. Either he died or doubting died. After Yi Xian left, more and more experts from the Dao Tomb headed for Heaven Realm Abyss. Banji's death was basically a foregone conclusion. It was done by doubting. Who else could it be other than doubting? The Heaven Realm Abyss that had stopped fighting began once again. In the starry sky, Yi Xian was flying on his sword. It was a pity because he did not use the soul-suppressing sword to absorb Banji's soul. Li Banji's soul was abnormally strong. If he could absorb it, the soul-suppressing sword would be greatly enhanced. In addition, the other party's bloodline was also very tempting. However, he did not choose to devour the other party's bloodline, because it was too risky. At this time, Yi Jiming suddenly said, "Do you think the Dao Tomb will suspect you?" Yi Xian said softly, "Didn't you Genshin suspect me before? But I believe that they will choose to believe me in the end." Yi Jiming asked, "Why?" Yi Xian said, "Just one point, they do not think that I have the strength to kill Li Banji. Li Banji was killed in an instant without any resistance. In their hearts, do you think that I, Yi Xian, have the strength?" Yi Jiming sighed softly. In fact, this time it was Li Banji's own fault. If not for the other party wanting to devour his bloodline, even if Yi Xian wanted to kill him, he would not have the ability. In a one-on-one fight, Yi Xian might be able to win, but that was the Dao Tomb. One word from Li Banji and Yi Xian would die in a group fight. But this Li Banji wanted to devour Yi Xian's bloodline. What was the most abnormal part of Yi Xian's body? It was his blood. However, Yi Jiming did not have the slightest bit of sympathy for Li Banji. That woman wanted to devour Yi Xian's bloodline. Once she succeeded, coupled with the fact that she was already married to Yi Xian, it was very likely that she would be able to smoothly take over the entire fifth dimension. It could be said that the woman's plan was very vicious. Not only did he want to kill Yi Xian, but he also wanted to obtain Yi Xian's Dao scripture and the five-dimensional universe. However, the other party did not expect Yi Xian's bloodline power to be so strong. Could be said that Li Banji had died and he had also lost the Dao Tomb. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly took out the Qiankuan gourd. Immortal gourd. Yi Xian didn't forget about it. He hadn't used the gourd yet. Yi Xian asked, "Immortal gourd, is the whirling world very strong?" The gourd Immortal hurriedly replied, "Of course. Very, very strong." Yi Xian asked again, "How strong is it?" The gourd Immortal fell silent. Yi Xian said, "For example, if I go to the whirling world, what level do I belong to?" The gourd Immortal thought for a moment and said, "A top expert. However, there are still people who can beat you." Yi Xian said softly, "I understand." He was quite curious about the whirling world. After all, it was the origin of the Dao scripture. The gourd Immortal suddenly asked, "Why are you suddenly asking me this question?" Yi Xian said softly, "I have a feeling that the whirling world will also become my enemy." The gourd Immortal, Yi Xian said again, "No matter what, we have to prepare for the worst." With that, he slowly closed his eyes. The gourd Immortal said, "The whirling world also has the Dao scripture that you mentioned." Yi Xian opened his eyes. "Which one?" The gourd Immortal said, "I don't know about that." Yi Xian fell silent. If he wanted to collect all the Dao scriptures, wouldn't he have to go to the whirling world? Yi Xian's expression gradually darkened. Collecting all the Dao scriptures was not an easy task. However, he did not plan to give up. One step at a time, Yi Xian collected his thoughts and sped up. Heaven Abyss. Heaven Abyss was located in an ancient starry sky. In this starry sky there was a huge starry sky abyss. No one knew how this starry sky abyss was formed and no one cared about this question. Because everyone cared about the fortune crystal in this starry sky abyss. In this starry sky abyss, there were countless mineral veins and these mineral veins produced the fortune crystal. For Dao validation experts, there were perhaps two things in this world that were most precious. One was the Dao scripture and the other was the fortune crystal. Even with the Dao scripture, without the fortune crystal, they would not be able to advance further. Cultivation required money. The higher one advanced, the more money they needed. This was also why there was the doubting in the Dao Tomb. Because when everyone gathered together, they could earn money faster and more. Could be said that Heaven Abyss was a place that doubting and the Dao Tomb had to fight for. This was also why the experts of Heaven Abyss did not return to the doubting even after such a huge incident. This was because this was the lifeline of doubting. If the Dao Tomb completely occupied this place, the consequences would be unimaginable. In the south of Heaven Abyss there was a huge sky palace. This sky palace was the base of doubting in Heaven Abyss. In the main hall of the sky palace there were only two people. One was the White Emperor Starlord who had rushed over from doubting. The other person was Sir God Real Marshal. The true martial god had a burly figure. His hair was loose and he wore golden chain armor. He stood with his hand on his sword. His eyes were like lightning, and he exuded a powerful aura that could take one's soul away. The true martial god was the leader of the doubting divine lords, and now the commander of the doubting army. The true martial god suddenly said, "Bai Dizzy, what do you think about the death of the divine lady in the Dao tomb?" Bai Dizzy said softly, "It must be Yi Xian." The true martial god looked at Bai Dizzy. "What do you mean?" Bai Dizzy said, "We didn't do anything. Who else could it be?" The true martial god frowned. "Does Yi Xian have the strength to kill the divine lady?" Bai Dizzy shook his head. "Probably not, but it must be him. He killed the divine lady and then framed me for doubting. I have to say this guy's move is very vicious." The true martial god said, "If he really killed her, isn't he afraid of the Dao tomb finding out?" Bai Dizzy said, "That proves that this person is not simple. He dared to kill the divine lady at a time like this. What courage." The true martial god looked at Bai Dizzy. "You seem to value Yi Xian a lot." Bai Dizzy said seriously, "True martial, don't underestimate this person. He is not only strong but his intelligence is also rare. Judging from this matter, the doubting and the Dao tomb could have made peace temporarily. But now that the divine lady is dead, it is impossible for us to make peace. Most importantly, Yi Xian has become the son-in-law of the Dao tomb, and he is fighting for the revenge of the divine lady. Goddess, come and find my Dao court with the slogan of revenge." He wanted to destroy the doubting for the fifth dimension Tendo and the fifth dimension universe, but now, his slogan has changed. Things are completely different, because he will have the support of the Dao tomb. If he wants to avenge the five-dimensional screen of the universe, the land of the Dao burial mound will not support him. Maybe they will sit on the sidelines and watch us fight against Yi Xian. But now he wants to avenge the goddess. The land of the Dao burial mound will not support him. The true martial god was silent. The White Emperor's son continued, "As far as I know, this person has already obtained the Dao scripture of that person from the underworld. He now has 5 Dao scriptures on him, but he made a false accusation saying that not only did my Dao court kill the goddess, but I also obtained the Dao scripture. Think about it, what will the Dao tomb do now? They will fight us at all cost. The current situation is not good for the Dao tomb." The true martial god suddenly said, "Can we kill this person?" Bai Dizzy was silent. The true martial god looked at Bai Dizzy. "Can't we?" Bai Dizzy said softly, "I'm afraid it will be difficult. The Dao ancestor personally attacked once in the doubting, but he was stopped by a mysterious woman. I, the doubting, have not been able to find out the true identity of that mysterious woman." A trace of worry flashed in his eyes. "This Yi Xian is not as simple as he looks. I have studied him for so long, but I have not found out the force behind him." The true martial god frowned. "The force behind him?" Bai Dizzy nodded. "There must be a powerful force behind him, but I, the doubting, cannot find out who this force is. The only thing we can find is 2 points. First, the woman in the plain dress. She seems to be Yi Xian's path protector, but we cannot find out where she is now. Other than that, there is also the power of his bloodline. His bloodline is extremely powerful, but I have never heard of a bloodline that can make people go crazy." At this point he looked at the White Emperor's son. Regardless of whether it is the woman in the plain dress or the source of his bloodline, they are not simple at all. As for these people, their presence is too inconspicuous. Even if they occasionally make a move, they are always instant kills. Thus, I have no way of knowing their true strength. In short, I, the doubting, cannot underestimate Yi Xian. His threat is no weaker than the Dao tomb." The true martial god slowly closed his eyes. "It is indeed not easy to obtain the 5 Dao scriptures." Bai Dizzy said softly, "Previously I suggested a temporary ceasefire because I wanted to get rid of Yi Xian first. However, I did not expect Yi Xian to go to the Dao tomb and the goddess to die." As he spoke, he sighed softly. "At the bottom of it all, it's my fault. I never imagined that Nian Yan would actually be so powerful, and I greatly underestimated her. If it wasn't for that, my Dao court wouldn't have fallen into such a passive situation." Moon Yan Yan. The true martial god's eyes flashed with seriousness. That woman only used 30% of her strength to destroy the Dao ancestor's body. If she used all her strength, who in the doubting could be her opponent? The hall suddenly fell into silence. In fact, Bai Dizzy was still afraid. If it was not for Moon Yanyan wanting to protect the fifth dimension, that woman could have destroyed the doubting. After all, the Dao tomb was still there. Fortunately, that woman's main goal was to protect the fifth dimension. At this time, the true martial god suddenly frowned. I have just received news that Yi Xian has arrived at the heaven abyss. Just as White Emperor was about to speak, a furious roar suddenly resounded from outside the palace. Bastards from the Dao court, how dare you kill the goddess of my Dao tomb? Why aren't all of you coming to die? It was Yi Xian's voice. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Bai Dizzy's face twitched. He could not help but curse. How shameless. Chapter 1359. Inside the palace. Bai Dizzy suddenly looked at True Martial Divine Lord. Kill this person. True Martial Divine Lord nodded and disappeared from the palace with his sword. But soon he came back. Bai Dizzy was stunned. What happened? True Martial Divine Lord was expressionless. He left. Left? Bai Dizzy's face darkened. He came and cursed before leaving? True Martial Divine Lord nodded. Bai Dizzy was silent. True Martial Divine Lord gripped his sword tightly with his right hand. Can he really devour swords? Bai Dizzy nodded. Yes. True Martial Divine Lord asked, is it a problem with his constitution or something else? Bai Dizzy said in a low voice, it might be a problem with his constitution. His constitution is a bit special. True Martial Divine Lord nodded. I understand. Then he looked at Bai Dizzy. This person's purpose in coming to Heaven Abyss should be to make Daoting and the land of Dao fight to the death. The more intense our fight, the better it is for him. So we can't let him have his way. Come with me to see Luo Ho. Bai Dizzy nodded. Okay. After saying that, the two of them disappeared. Yi Xian wanted to kill a few people before leaving, but he suddenly felt danger. He didn't choose to take the risk and left decisively. Although he was strong now, he wasn't invincible. Not long after Yi Xian left Heaven Palace, a man in black suddenly appeared in front of him. The man in black said in a hoarse voice, Luo Ho wants to see you. Luo Ho, the current boss of the land of Dao in Dual World Abyss. Yi Xian nodded. Okay. The man in black turned and left. Yi Xian followed. Soon Yi Xian followed the man in black to an ancient city. The ancient city stood in the starry sky and was extremely spectacular. Dao Tomb City. As soon as he approached the city, Yi Xian felt countless powerful auras. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression was unprecedentedly solemn. At this moment, he clearly felt the difference between the fifth dimension and the doubting Dao Tomb. The difference wasn't just a little big. Yi Xian followed the black-clothed man to a large hall. After entering the hall, the black-clothed man quietly retreated. Yi Xian looked up and saw a middle-aged man standing not far in front of him. The middle-aged man wore a long black robe and had long hair that draped over his shoulders. At his waist was a strangely shaped blade. Rahu. Yi Xian realized that he couldn't sense the existence of this person in front of him at all. Luo Ho suddenly said, show yourselves. As soon as he finished speaking, Bai Dizzy and True Martial God appeared in the hall. Both of them did not come with their true bodies, but rather with their illusions. Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, we meet again. Yi Xian was expressionless. He didn't speak, but he was secretly thinking about what might happen next. Luo Ho looked at True Martial God. True Martial, I believe the two of you are here for young Master Yi. If you have something to say, just say it. We are all quite busy. True Martial Divine Lord looked at Luo Ho. Luo Ho, do you think Goddess was killed by me, Daoting? Luo Ho was expressionless. You have to ask Daoting. True Martial God smiled. Luo Ho, you and I have fought for nearly 1,000 years. You should know my personality. I True Martial disdain doing such things. Luo Ho was silent. Yi Xian suddenly spoke. Dao scripture. Hearing this, Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, I believe that True Martial God disdains doing such things. However, just because you don't do it doesn't mean others won't do it. As he said this, he pointed at Bai Dizzy. For example, Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. What do you mean? Yi Xian looked emotionless. The True Martial Arts Divine Lord is a real strong man. Even if such a strong man has done something sneaky, he will have the nerve to admit it. However, not everyone is like the true martial arts divine lord. White Emperor Star-Lord, in order to destroy my fifth dimension, what tricks have you not used? Bai Dizzy smiled. But I don't have the strength to go to the Dao tomb to kill people. Yi Xian said, can't you send someone? Do you lack experts for doubting? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. I've long heard that young Master Yi is good at distorting the truth. Now that I've seen it for myself, you really live up to your reputation. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. What? Doubting killed someone and stole the Dao scripture, but you don't dare to admit it? Or do you want to put the blame on me and say that I, Yi Xian, killed someone? Bai Dizzy sneered. Is that not possible? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. White Emperor Star-Lord, I thank you. Thank you for thinking so highly of me. Bai Dizzy didn't care about Yi Xian. He looked at Luo Ho. Luo Ho, don't you think there's something fishy about this? Luo Ho's expression was calm. There's something fishy. That's why I asked you to discuss it. You said that the person was killed by this young Master Yi. Do you have any evidence? Bai Dizzy said, but he doesn't have any evidence to prove that I, doubting, killed him. Yi Xian said, besides you doubting, who else could it be? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. Don't I still have you? Yi Xian said, what reason do I have to kill the goddess? Or should I say, do I have the ability to kill the goddess silently? Bai Dizzy smiled. It's because all the signs show that it's not you, that it's most likely you. Yi Xian was expressionless. According to your logic, can I say that all the signs show that I'm not your father and I'm most likely to be your father? Bai Dizzy frowned. Manners? Yi Xian spread out his hands. Manners are for people. In my opinion, you doubting people are not human. Bai Dizzy frowned. Yi Xian, you're also a person. Can't you have the demeanor of a strong person? Demeanor of a strong person? Yi Xian said fiercely, you killed my newly married wife and you want me to talk about demeanor of a strong person with you? You guys are really funny. Bai Dizzy said in a deep voice, I, doubting, did not kill the goddess. Yi Xian said angrily, then who killed her? Bai Dizzy was a little angry. You're asking me, but who should I ask? Yi Xian stared at Bai Dizzy. Then you killed her. Bai Dizzy was so angry that he wanted to hit him. Damn it, this guy is making a scene. At this time, True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, as far as I know, young Master Yi and the goddess met not long ago. As soon as the goddess died, young Master Yi swore to avenge her. Young Master Yi, don't you think you're going a little too far? Or is it because you have a guilty conscience? Hearing this, Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, the goddess likes me. True Martial Divine Lord was speechless. Bai Dizzy sneered. Likes you? Why does she like you? Yi Xian looked at Bai Dizzy. Why doesn't she like me? Bai Dizzy, it's not that I, Yi Xian, want to boast, but among the younger generation of doubting, is there anyone more handsome than me? Oh no, is there anyone better than me? Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian and did not speak. There really wasn't anyone. Don't talk about doubting. There wasn't anyone in the Dao tomb. Yi Xian spread his hands. Since ancient times, beauties love heroes. I am so outstanding, so what if the goddess likes me? Let me ask you, what's wrong? Bai Dizzy's expression became uglier. Yi Xian said, there is one more thing. The goddess took the initiative to go to the fifth dimension to propose to me. The goddess took the initiative, not me, Yi Xian. White Emperor Star-Lord, True Martial Divine Lord, have you never been pursued by a woman? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. True Martial Divine Lord looked at Yi Xian. Do you like the goddess? Yi Xian's expression was calm. Is it important whether I like her or not? True Martial Divine Lord frowned. Isn't it important? Yi Xian spread his hands. I don't think it's important. In my opinion, the goddess is beautiful enough to be with me, Yi Xian. Since she likes me, what's wrong with sleeping with her? What's wrong? Divine Lord True Martial was dumbfounded when he heard that. Bai Dizzy also looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. Was this something a human could say? Was this something a human could say? Luo Ho couldn't help but look at Yi Xian. At this time Yi Xian suddenly said, can't a man have more women? Moreover, after I marry the goddess, I can borrow the power of the Dao tomb to resist doubting. Why wouldn't I do it? Bai Dizzy shook his head. Shameless scumbag. It's her misfortune that the goddess likes you. Yi Xian sneered. I, Yi Xian, dare to take responsibility for what I do. I, Yi Xian, dare to admit that I married the goddess not only because she's beautiful but also because I want to use the Dao tomb to resist doubting. This is my goal. Yi Xian dared to admit it. Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian. He didn't have a good impression of Yi Xian, but he had to admit that Yi Xian dared to take responsibility for what he did and dared to admit it. In this aspect, Yi Xian was much better than most people. At this time, Yi Xian said, I don't have a deep relationship with the goddess, but since she's married to me, she belongs to me, Yi Xian. Since she was killed by you, shouldn't I avenge her? Moreover, you also stole my Dao scripture. Of course, from Yi Xian's words, Yi Xian also gained a piece of information. That was, Yi Xian was married to the goddess and there was no harm at all. In this case, how stupid would he be to kill the goddess? Dao scripture. Luo Ho collected his thoughts and looked at Bai Dizzy and True Martial Divine Lord. Bai Dizzy said in a deep voice, Yi Xian, don't slander us. We didn't kill the goddess and we didn't steal your Dao scripture. Yi Xian suddenly said fiercely, then who was it? Bai Dizzy was also a little angry. How would I know who it was? At this point he suddenly realized something and stopped. Didn't he just insist that it was Yi Xian? Yi Xian sneered and didn't say anything. Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, you really aren't simple. Yi Xian turned to Luo Ho. Senior Luo Ho, I don't want to talk to them anymore. They killed the goddess and stole the Dao scripture. Now I just want to fight them to the death and sacrifice half of my soul in heaven. Then he turned around and left with his sword. Luo Ho frowned. Where are you going? Outside the hall, Yi Xian didn't look back. I'm going to the heavenly palace to fight them to the death. Soon he disappeared into the distance. Inside the hall, True Martial Divine Lord looked at Bai Dizzy. You really didn't send anyone to kill the goddess? Bai Dizzy. P.S. I'm so handsome, can't you vote for me? Chapter 1360. Bai Dizzy was infuriated by True Martial Divine Lord's words. Seeing White Emperor's expression, True Martial Divine Lord said softly, looking at him, even I suspect that we killed the goddess. What about the Dao tomb? Let's go. After saying that, he disappeared with White Emperor's son. Inside the palace, Luo Ho was expressionless. Suddenly, a voice came from inside the palace. Luo Ho, do you believe him? Luo Ho shook his head. No. But he had no reason to kill Bonji. He couldn't have killed Bonji in an instant. This matter is very strange. Dai Yi, go and investigate it. The voice said, yes. Inside the palace, Luo Ho slowly closed his eyes. Yi Xian. In fact, he had also suspected Yi Xian. But why did Yi Xian kill Bonji? Yi Xian had no motive to kill. But doubting did. Suddenly, a voice came from inside the palace. He really went to the heavenly palace. Luo Ho said softly, could it really be doubting? Heavenly palace. Yi Xian stood there with his sword in hand. In front of him stood more than a dozen strong people, all of whom were at the peak Dao proving realm. And in the dark he felt the presence of at least a dozen Dao defense cultivators. Then Bai Dizzy appeared in front of Yi Xian. Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, you really came. Yi Xian smiled. Surprised. Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. You are the most shameless person I have ever seen. Yi Xian said softly, living is the most important thing. The White Emperor smiled and said, you dared to come here alone, so you must have thought that the Dao tomb would help you, right? Yi Xian looked at Bai Dizzy. What do you think? Bai Dizzy narrowed his eyes. We won't give them the chance to help. Suddenly Yi Xian looked at Sky Palace. I've long heard that True Martial God Sword doctrine is superb. Today Yi Xian would like to challenge you to a one-on-one fair fight. A fair fight. When they heard this, the experts of the Dao Palace who were about to attack in secret stopped in succession. Bai Dizzy's brows knit together slightly, and he was just about to speak when a ray of light suddenly resounded from within the palace. In the next moment, an enormous golden sword shot into the sky from within the palace, and then it slashed directly at Yi Xian. True Martial Divine Sword. True Martial God took action himself. Obviously, Emperor True Martial had accepted Yi Xian's challenge. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the sword. The sword light was like lightning, causing the starry sky to tremble. The realm of this sword was above his. Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward and then he thrust his sword forward. The sword directly pierced the sword light. Bang! Yi Xian retreated 1,000 feet in an instant. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man appeared not too far away from Yi Xian. It was True Martial God. True Martial God gazed at Yi Xian, The sword has changed and it contains the grand Tao within it. In the younger generation you're number one in the sword doctrine. Yi Xian smiled. If true martial god wants to kill me, then you can ask all the experts in the surroundings to attack together. In that way Yi Xian will definitely die. Bai Dizzy suddenly said, attack together. He knew that this was the best time to kill Yi Xian. If all the experts attacked together, then not to mention Yi Xian, even Rahu would definitely die here. However, no one attacked. Bai Dizzy gazed at True Martial God and True Martial God said, I'll fight him fairly. Bai Dizzy spoke solemnly, True Martial God. True Martial God looked at Bai Dizzy. The doubting may be able to kill him today, but we will become the laughingstock of the Dao tomb. Also, do we need to attack together to kill a young man? Bai Dizzy understood. Not everyone knew how powerful Yi Xian was. If they chose to attack Yi Xian now, it would mean that they were not confident and would weaken the doubting's power. After all, Yi Xian was challenging True Martial God and he was challenging someone stronger than him. Under such circumstances, if the doubting chose to attack together, what would that mean? Most of the people in the doubting were the Grand Dao Guardians and they were all arrogant. White Emperor sighed softly and did not say anything else. He was a civil servant in the doubting and he could not understand the thoughts and actions of the martial artists, but he had to respect them. The strong had their own pride. Especially now, aura was very important to the doubting. Bai Dizzy retreated to the side. True Martial God looked at Yi Xian. Draw your sword. Yi Xian nodded and suddenly disappeared. A sword light tore through the field. In the distance, True Martial God suddenly drew his sword and slashed. It was a powerful slash with the power of thunder. Boom! Yi Xian's sword light was shattered. At the same time, a powerful sword force pushed Yi Xian hundreds of meters away. As soon as Yi Xian stopped, the starry space around him exploded. His body had withstood True Martial God's power, but the space he was in could not. Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His eyes were full of fighting spirit. After reaching the doctrine realm, he wanted to fight to his heart's content. He wanted to use his sword alone without the power of his bloodline or killing intent. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes, and the executing heaven sword in his hand began to vibrate. In the distance, True Martial God suddenly took a step forward. With one step he was in front of Yi Xian and he stabbed at Yi Xian. This sword strike was like a sudden clap of thunder, so fast that it was impossible to cover one's ears. The sword suddenly stopped a few meters away from Yi Xian. Sword realm. Under the sword realm, the sword's speed was suppressed. Suddenly, Sir True Martial took another step forward. Something in the sword intent seemed to be torn apart. Yi Xian's face instantly turned pale and he thrust his sword out at the same time. The sword changed. There were thousands of changes in one sword. This was his own sword Dao. Boom. As soon as the two swords touched, Yi Xian's sword realm disappeared, and he retreated hundreds of meters. Before he could stop, True Martial God appeared in front of him again. This time True Martial God did not stab. Instead he slashed with his sword. As the sword slashed down, it was as if thousands of horses and soldiers were galloping over with unstoppable momentum. Facing the sword, Yi Xian did not choose to face it head-on. Instead he blocked it with his sword. Boom. In an instant Yi Xian retreated hundreds of meters. As he retreated, True Martial God suddenly took a step forward. With this step he appeared in front of Yi Xian. The next moment he slashed with his sword. The sword slashed and the space was torn open. It was a very simple diagonal flick without any fancy movements. This time Yi Xian did not dodge. Instead he stabbed at True Martial God's chest. A life for a life. However, at that moment, the sword in True Martial God's hand suddenly changed its stance. The sword slashed at Yi Xian's executing heaven sword. Clang. Yi Xian's executing heaven sword shook violently and almost flew out of Yi Xian's hand. At the same time, True Martial God slashed forward. The slash seemed to shatter the starry sky. It was terrifying. At that moment Yi Xian disappeared into thin air. Space Dao Law. As soon as Yi Xian disappeared, the sword in the True Martial God's hand suddenly stopped. Then he swung his sword to the right. Boom. A sword light shattered, and a figure retreated rapidly from that area of space, retreating a distance of 3,000 feet with each step. The True Martial God looked at Yi Xian. I've been in the heaven abyss for 1,000 years and I've been fighting for 1,000 years. I've met all kinds of opponents and I've almost died countless times. You have a lot of combat experience, but you're like a child in front of me. If you think you can beat me with combat skills, I can tell you that you're dreaming." In the distance, Yi Xian was silent. At that moment he realized another problem. He had a serious lack of combat experience. In the fifth dimension his combat experience was naturally top-notch. However, in Celestial Abyss, Yi Xian's combat experience and combat skills were like that of a child's. From the start of the fight until now he felt powerless. He felt like he was being controlled by his opponent. It was as if his opponent knew his next move. Consciousness suppression. Once he was suppressed, all moves were useless. At that moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly looked at True Martial God and sent him a Xianxia transmission. "Don't hold back." True Martial God nodded. He naturally understood what it meant to be a disaster. Although Yi Xian in front of him could not defeat him, Yi Xian was still very young. To be able to reach such a level at such a young age, this was extremely terrifying. Thinking of this, True Martial God suddenly looked at Yi Xian. The next moment he disappeared. The next moment, a destructive sword light slashed toward Yi Xian like a storm. The power of this sword was enough to destroy the entire starry sky, let alone Yi Xian. However, the power of this sword was contained in the sword light. The surrounding starry sky was unharmed. However, Yi Xian, who was far away, did not dodge at all. He just let the sword strike his body. Boom. Under everyone's shocked gazes, Yi Xian directly absorbed the sword light. He absorbed it. Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian. In fact, he was very curious. What kind of physique did Yi Xian have? He could even absorb True Martial God's sword energy? Damn, wasn't this physique too abnormal? Invincible among swordsmen? Next to him, True Martial God whispered, "You can really devour sword energy." Yi Xian greedily took a deep breath. He had to admit that True Martial God's sword was very nourishing. In the distance, True Martial God suddenly disappeared. In the distance, Yi Xian's pupils shrank. He held his sword with both hands and slashed forward. A ray of sword light appeared in front of Yi Xian like a crescent moon. He did not choose to absorb it because this time True Martial God did not use his sword. He used everything. At this moment, a powerful force suddenly pierced the crescent moon-like sword light. Boom. Yi Xian's sword light instantly shattered. At the same time, True Martial God punched Yi Xian in the chest. However, the sword in Yi Xian's hand had become the soul-suppressing sword. The moment he flew out, he stabbed the sword into True Martial God's chest. Boom. Yi Xian retreated thousands of feet in an instant, and his soul-suppressing sword stabbed into True Martial Divine Lord's chest. Chapter 1361. The Soul-Suppressing Sword. The moment the soul-suppressing sword pierced True Martial Divine Lord's chest, a powerful soul power enveloped him. However, the soul-suppressing sword that had always been successful failed at this moment. The soul-suppressing sword couldn't suppress True Martial Divine Lord's soul. Sensing this, Yi Xian was shocked. He opened his palm and the soul-suppressing sword flew back into his hand. In the distance, True Martial Divine Lord looked at Yi Xian. A Tao-controlling realm sword. Yi Xian's expression grew serious. He didn't expect the soul-suppressing sword to be ineffective against his opponent. True Martial Divine Lord looked at Yi Xian. "Are you curious why I'm fine?" Yi Xian asked. "Are you a soul cultivator?" True Martial Divine Lord shook his head. "I'm not a soul cultivator, but my soul is a battle soul." Yi Xian frowned. "Battle soul." True Martial Divine Lord nodded. "I've been fighting in the celestial abyss for 1,000 years. My soul has long become a battle soul. Do you know what a battle soul is?" Yi Xian shook his head. True Martial Divine Lord walked slowly toward Yi Xian. "A battle soul is a state, a spirit. Even if my body is destroyed, my fighting spirit is not extinguished and my soul is not dead. I can continue to fight. My soul is immortal and my fighting spirit is eternal. This is a battle soul." Yi Xian whispered, "I underestimated you." He knew that if he wanted to defeat this person he had to defeat him with strength. True Martial Divine Lord stopped and looked at Yi Xian. "You have a God seal. That means you are a great Tao guardian too." Yi Xian smiled. "Yes." True Martial Divine Lord was silent for a moment, then turned to look at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy knew what True Martial Divine Lord meant. After a moment of silence he said, "He has Tao scriptures." The True Martial Divine Sovereign slowly closed his eyes and sent a voice transmission with profound energy. Bai Dizzy is a genius. Not only is he extremely talented, but he's even more ruthless. If I let him come here and train him for 10 years, he will definitely be able to shoulder the heavy responsibility of guarding the celestial abyss. The person who was supposed to be a pillar of my doubting has now become the mortal enemy of my doubting. Bai Dizzy shook his head. I had the same idea when I was investigating him, but I couldn't recruit him because he killed the sixth princess. Just because of this, it's impossible for him to enter my doubting. Divine Lord True Marshall's expression turned cold. Don't you know what that woman is like? She only had herself to blame for her death. Let alone outsiders, even I want to kill her. Bai Dizzy smiled wryly. In fact, he didn't like that woman either. Not only was she willful, but she was also brainless and caused trouble every day. This time she had kicked an iron plate. Not only had she kicked an iron plate, but she had also caused Moon Yin to injure a Dao ancestor. The reason why the doubting was in such a passive position was all because of that woman. But it couldn't be helped. Her identity was there, and Moon Yin hadn't shown that he was that strong. At that time, even Bai Dizzy had chosen to protect the sixth princess without hesitation. Of course, if he had known how terrifying Moon Yin was, he might have solved the matter in a different way. But there were no ifs in the world. In the distance, True Marshal Divine Lord said, Bai Dizzy, have you ever thought about why the doubting has been declining since the beginning? Bai Dizzy was silent. True Marshal Divine Lord said, is it because of the Dao breakers? No, it's because there's a problem with those of us who guard the Dao. Many of us have started to go against the original intentions of the 3000 Dao. The Dao is not fair. There will be Dao breakers in the world. Bai Dizzy shook his head. True Marshal, you know how difficult it is to reform the doubting from the inside. Especially now that the Dao tomb is here. If we want to change, we will be doomed eternally. True Marshal Divine Lord said softly, I used to fight for the Dao for my beliefs, but now. Bai Dizzy's expression changed. True Marshal, you can't think like that. Every force will have problems. The doubting has problems. We have to think about how to change, not be disappointed. You know, when the Dao ancestor took over the doubting was already in a mess. He thought the same as us. He wanted to change the doubting. But now we are facing a bigger problem, and that is the Dao breakers. It's not a good time to attack the doubting. True Marshal Divine Lord slowly closed his eyes. Bai Dizzy said, I believe it will get better, although the process might be a little painful. True Marshal Divine Lord said softly, the doubting will get better. With that he looked at Zhou Xian in the distance. It's a pity to kill you, but I have no choice but to kill you. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. In the distance, Zhou Xian suddenly slashed with his sword. Boom! A wave of sword light suddenly erupted. In an instant, Zhou Xian retreated. As he retreated, the sword in Zhou Xian's hand suddenly turned into a sword light and flew out. In the distance, True Marshal Divine Lord punched. Boom! Zhou Xian's sword was sent flying by True Marshal Divine Lord's punch. The moment the sword flew out, True Marshal Divine Lord appeared in front of Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian was about to attack when a mysterious power suddenly enveloped him. Battle Domain. Zhou Xian was shocked. He hadn't expected that True Marshal Divine Lord actually possessed a battle domain. A strand of powerful battle intent locked onto Zhou Xian. Battle intent. At this moment, Zhou Xian sensed True Marshal Divine Lord's powerful battle intent. It was so strong that he'd never seen it before. Zhou Xian didn't dare hold back when facing such an expert, and he immediately utilized 4 domains. Slaughter Domain, Sword Domain, Death Domain, Blood Domain. As soon as the 4 domains appeared, True Marshal Divine Lord's battle intent was instantly suppressed. Meanwhile, Zhou Xian suddenly slashed down from within the Sword Domain. True Marshal Divine Lord didn't retreat, and he smashed his fist forward instead. It was a head-on collision. The force of his fist was extremely domineering. Bang! A world-shaking explosion resounded abruptly, and then a figure retreated repeatedly. It was Zhou Xian. However, Bai Dizzy's expression had become slightly solemn. Because True Marshal Divine Lord had retreated by over 10 m as well. It wasn't just Bai Dizzy, the doubting experts here were quite shocked as well. 4 domains. It was extremely difficult for ordinary people to comprehend even 1 domain. However, Zhou Xian had actually comprehended 4. True Marshal Divine Lord glanced at Zhou Xian and spoke softly, 4 domains. Zhou Xian wiped off the blood from the corners of his mouth. Needless to say, true martial divine lord was really strong. Even his 4 domains weren't able to suppress true martial divine lord. The killing intent in true martial divine lord's eyes grew stronger. Now he was starting to fear Yi Xian. If this young man were to mature, then he would definitely become an extremely terrifying existence. True martial divine lord suddenly vanished on the spot when he thought up to this point. Bang! In the blink of an eye, a force capable of destroying the heavens and the earth swept through the battlefield. At this moment the entire starry sky trembled. This time true martial divine lord had utilized a killer move. Everything was obliterated beneath his fist. In the distance, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. He knew that his strength was far inferior to true martial divine lords. However, he wasn't afraid. There was only excitement in his heart. Fight! As if sensing Yi Xian's fighting spirit, the executing heaven sword trembled violently. Sword hums reverberated throughout the starry sky. When true martial divine lord arrived in front of Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. He charged forward and slashed down with his sword. One sword to decide life and death. He wasn't as strong as Qing'e, so he couldn't really decide life and death with one sword. However, he had the determination to decide life and death. Under this sword, if one of them didn't die, one of them would die. When a person wasn't afraid of death, that was when he was at his bravest. The power of this sword could be said to be his strongest sword under normal circumstances. However, reality was cruel. As Yi Xian's sword fell, he was sent flying backward in an instant. He was sent flying thousands of feet away. While he was flying backward, every inch of space was destroyed. However, true martial divine lord had also retreated dozens of feet. Compared to Yi Xian, his situation was much better. True martial divine lord looked at Yi Xian, the murderous intent in his eyes thickening. In the beginning he had cherished talent, but now he was truly afraid. Although Yi Xian couldn't defeat him, he wasn't proud at all. After all, he had lived for tens of thousands of years. How old was Yi Xian? Under normal circumstances, a young man like Yi Xian wouldn't even be qualified to fight him. However, Yi Xian had fought him for so long. At this moment, Yi Xian, who was in the distance, suddenly jumped up and slashed at the true martial god. He attacked first. True martial divine lord narrowed his eyes. The murderous intent in his eyes was almost tangible. Defeat wasn't scary. What was scary was not having the guts to fight. You could lose to your enemy, but you couldn't not have the guts to fight. If you couldn't win, it was a matter of strength. As long as you didn't die, there would come a time when you could win. But not having the guts to fight was a matter of state of mind. The most terrifying thing about a man wasn't failure, but cowardice. The moment Yi Xian attacked first, true martial divine lord knew Yi Xian's temperament. That was why fear appeared in his eyes. True martial divine lord took a step forward. When his step landed, the stars trembled. When Yi Xian's sword landed, true martial divine lord suddenly punched. The moment the punch landed, the stars within tens of thousands of miles trembled. Without a doubt, Yi Xian was sent flying again. This time he flew for thousands of feet. This time Yi Xian was in an even worse state than before. His body cracked. Moreover, the space where Yi Xian stood collapsed. The power of a single punch was so strong. In the distance, Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He looked up at true martial divine lord again. A moment later he disappeared again. He attacked first again. A ray of sword light flashed and tore through the stars. In the distance, true martial divine lord slowly clenched his right hand. On the other side, the White Emperor's son frowned. Was Yi Xian courting death? No. Based on his understanding of Yi Xian was definitely not a brainless fool. So what was Yi Xian doing now? Or perhaps he was playing some kind of trick again? Bai Dizzy's expression changed as if he thought of something. He looked at true martial divine lord and said, "Kill him. This guy is playing dirty." Chapter 1362. He's playing dirty. The moment the son of the White Emperor's voice fell, Yi Xian flew out again. At this time, before Yi Xian could attack, the true martial divine lord took the initiative to attack. However, a man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian as soon as the true martial god made his move. Luoho. Bai Dizzy's face darkened when he saw Luoho. Luoho smiled. "True martial, you're bullying the weak." True martial emperor looked at Luoho. "I'll explain one last time. I didn't send anyone to kill the goddess." Luoho shook his head. "It doesn't matter anymore. It didn't matter. The true martial god frowned slightly. Then, as if something had occurred to him, he suddenly turned his head to look at Zhou Xian, who was covered in wounds in the distance. What a cunning plan. Luo Ho didn't say anything else. He walked in front of Zhou Xian and was about to leave with Zhou Xian when a powerful force locked him in place. Luo Ho turned to look at True Martial Emperor. Are we going to fight now? True Martial Emperor looked at Luo Ho. For him. Luo Ho smiled. If he was doubting, would you fight against the Dao Tomb for him? True Martial Emperor was silent. Because he would. Luo Ho laughed and left with Zhou Xian. True Martial Emperor slowly closed his eyes. His expression was gloomy. At this time, White Thearka's son appeared next to True Martial God and said, "He is smarter than we thought." What was Zhou Xian's purpose in challenging True Martial Emperor? To kill True Martial Emperor? No. Zhou Xian wasn't stupid. He knew he couldn't kill True Martial Emperor. True Martial Emperor was the leader of the Stellar Lords. If Zhou Xian killed him, wouldn't that be a joke? Zhou Xian's real purpose in challenging True Martial Emperor was to prove himself. He wanted to prove to the Dao Tomb that Zhou Xian was valuable. Previously there were rumors that Zhou Xian was a monster, but the Dao Tomb had no idea how strong he really was. But now the Dao Tomb knew. This was what Rahu meant when he said that doubting didn't kill the goddess. This was because the Dao Tomb was currently protecting Zhou Xian because Zhou Xian was valuable, not because of the goddess. When a person has value, others will be willing to invest in you. To put it simply, although Zhou Xian was married to the goddess, the Dao Tomb had not recognized Zhou Xian's identity. But now the Dao Tomb had recognized him. At least he admitted it on the surface. That was how the world worked. You were valuable and everything was friendly to you. But if you had no value, your loved ones might dislike you. In the battlefield, Bai Dizzy said, he knows that he can't compete with doubting, so he must use the Dao Tomb. His actions will make it impossible for me and the Dao Tomb to make peace with the Dao Tomb, and we won't be able to deal with him in the fifth dimension. Then he slowly closed his eyes. Not only that, as long as he is outstanding enough and remains an enemy of doubting, even if the Dao Tomb knows that he killed the goddess, the Dao Tomb will pretend that it doesn't know and will say that I killed him. His value has already surpassed the goddess. True Martial Emperor suddenly said softly, the Dao Tomb will nurture him. Bai Dizzy nodded. His expression was extremely ugly. If Zhou Xian was nurtured by the Dao Tomb, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. With this guy's talent, it wouldn't be long before even True Martial Emperor could kill him. Bai Dizzy shook his head and sighed. Originally he thought that after Moon Yanyan's death, it would be much easier for doubting to kill Zhou Xian. But now things had become more troublesome. Bai Dizzy suddenly said, where is the white robe? True Martial Emperor said, in the depths of heaven abyss. Bai Dizzy said softly, tell him to come back. True Martial Emperor nodded and said softly, Bai Dizzy, go and ask for a decree. Tell all the experts of doubting who are in seclusion to come out. Bai Dizzy's expression changed. This, True Martial Emperor said softly, things will become more and more serious. Bai Dizzy nodded. I'll go right now. Then he turned and left. In the starry sky, True Martial Emperor looked into the depths of the starry sky with deep worry in his eyes. Dao Tomb City. In the room, Zhou Xian lay quietly. His injuries were rapidly recovering. At this moment, Zhou Xian's mind was filled with the battle with True Martial Emperor. From the beginning he was suppressed in both strength and battle awareness. At this moment he deeply felt that he was severely lacking in battle experience. True Martial Emperor hadn't reached Dao attainment state, but he was completely different from other Dao defensive state experts. A Dao defensive state expert who fought his way up was truly terrifying. Challenging someone of a higher level also depended on the person. At this moment, Yi Jiming's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. What are your plans next? Yi Xian said softly, I'm not strong enough. I need to improve my strength. And this place is just right for me to improve my strength. Yi Jiming said in a low voice, I can feel that True Martial Emperor wants to kill you. If you stay here, doubting will definitely target you. Yi Xian nodded. I know. Yi Jiming wanted to say something but stopped. Yi Xian smiled. Don't worry, Jiming. I'll be careful. Yi Jiming sighed. Right now, Yi Xian was actually playing with fire. Neither doubting nor the land of Dao Tomb were easy targets. They wouldn't let Yi Xian toy with them. One careless move and Yi Xian would be doomed. But Yi Xian had no choice but to play like this. Because in the current situation, if Yi Xian didn't play like this, once doubting and the land of Dao Tomb reached some kind of agreement, Yi Xian and the five-dimensional universe would be doomed. An hour later, Yi Xian's injuries had completely recovered. He left his room. The Dao Tomb city was filled with powerful auras. Here, the weakest experts were at the self-release realm. Moreover, they were truly at the self-release realm. In addition to that, Yi Xian also found that everyone in this place was giving off a fierce murderous aura. These people were all battle-hardened. The gap between the experts of the five-dimensional universe and the land of Dao Tomb and doubting was not small, whether it was in terms of quantity or quality. The five-dimensional universe still had a long way to go. Regardless, Yi Xian would continue to walk forward with the five-dimensional universe. At this time, a man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. This man was Tu Ming. There were a few people beside Tu Ming, all at the self-release realm. Tu Ming looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. At this time, a man beside Tu Ming suddenly said, "Brother Tu Ming, is he the Yi Xian who married the goddess?" Tu Ming nodded. The man sized up Yi Xian and then he walked in front of Yi Xian. The corners of his mouth curled up. "I heard that you went to challenge the true martial divine lord?" Yi Xian nodded. "What's the matter?" The man smiled. "If you were really that powerful, why would you need Marshal Luo Ho to save you?" Yi Xian suddenly slapped him. Slap. The man didn't even have time to react before he was sent flying by Yi Xian's slap. He flew dozens of meters away. Tu Ming and the others were stunned when they saw Yi Xian suddenly attack. They quickly surrounded Yi Xian. Tu Ming looked at Yi Xian. "You do it." Yi Xian looked coldly at Tu Ming and the others. "I'm going to challenge the true martial divine lord. It's true that I haven't defeated him, but I dare to go. Do you dare to go?" The expressions of Tu Ming and the others were slightly unsightly. Yi Xian looked at Tu Ming and pointed at him. "Are you going?" "You don't dare. A bunch of cowards." With that he turned around and left. At this moment the man who was sent flying suddenly rushed in front of Yi Xian. He was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly slapped him. Bang! At this moment the man was sent flying 300 m away, beating up a self-release realm expert. Tu Ming and the others were stunned. Especially Tu Ming. He knew that Yi Xian was very strong, but he didn't know how strong Yi Xian was. Yi Xian suddenly walked in front of the man he'd slapped, and he stepped on the man's chest. "Looking for trouble with me? Are you worthy?" The man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "You dare to humiliate me?" Yi Xian suddenly slammed his fist against the man's face. Bang! The man's head exploded. His soul was destroyed. The expressions of Tu Ming and the others who were about to attack instantly stopped when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian had killed someone. They hadn't expected this at all. The eyes of the man who'd been killed by Yi Xian were open wide, and they were filled with disbelief. He hadn't imagined that Yi Xian would kill him as well. Right at this moment, a powerful force suddenly enveloped Yi Xian. Yi Xian swiftly turned around and smashed his fist forward. Bang! A powerful force erupted in front of Yi Xian, and Yi Xian was instantly pushed over 100 m back. A middle-aged man stood in front of Yi Xian. The middle-aged man wore a black robe, and his hands were hidden within his sleeves. Tu Ming and the others hurriedly bowed respectfully when they saw the middle-aged man. Bitter King. Bitter King. One of the 4 kings of the Dao Tomb, and he only obeyed Rahu. Bitter King gazed at Yi Xian. "Why did you kill him?" Yi Xian replied with a question. "Is it wrong for me to challenge the true martial divine monarch?" Bitter King frowned slightly. "I'm the one who asked you that question." Yi Xian pointed at the young man's corpse. "He humiliated me first." Bitter King turned to look at Tu Ming. Tu Ming hesitated for a moment before he told Bitter King about what had happened. He naturally didn't dare conceal anything from Bitter King, so he didn't exaggerate. A short moment later, Bitter King gazed at Yi Xian. "He doesn't deserve death." Yi Xian's face was expressionless. Yi Xian hate bastards that are tough to their own people but weak to outsiders. As he spoke, he glanced at Tu Ming and the others. "So what if you bully your own people? Go bully doubting if you have the ability. Let me ask all of you, do you dare to go doubting with me now?" Tu Ming and the others had slightly unsightly expressions when they heard this. Bitter King suddenly said, "I've said it. He doesn't deserve death." His voice was slightly stunned. Yi Xian looked at Bitter King. "Then what should we do? He's already dead. Why don't I apologize to him?" As he finished speaking, he turned to look at the young man's corpse and bowed. I'm sorry I killed you. Please forgive me. Everyone. Chapter 1363. Even though Bitter King's expression was calm as he gazed at Yi Xian, everyone here felt a strand of invisible pressure descend upon them. Yi Xian gazed at Bitter King with an emotionless expression. What? Do you intend to hit me? There wasn't even a trace of fear in his eyes. Bitter King's eyes narrowed slightly while he slowly clenched his right fist. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly laughed with ridicule. So this is the Dao tomb. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly drew his sword and charged at Bitter King. Tu Ming and the others were stunned when they witnessed this scene. Has Yi Xian gone mad? He's actually attacking Bitter King. Bitter King was quite stunned as well. Did this fellow attack me? Bitter King didn't think too much about it and smashed his fist forward. Bang! Yi Xian was blasted flying and then he crashed heavily to the ground. However, Yi Xian immediately crawled up from the ground and charged at Bitter King again. He's still going to fight. Tu Ming and the others looked at each other. Was Yi Xian out of his mind? Meanwhile, more and more experts from the Dao tomb had arrived in the surroundings. All of their faces were covered in disbelief. That's Bitter King. Has Yi Xian gone mad? He's actually attacking Bitter King? Yi Xian charged over and over again, but he had no doubt that he wasn't a match for Bitter King at all. However, Yi Xian wasn't afraid at all, and he charged over and over again to fight Bitter King. Tu Ming stared fixedly at Yi Xian, who was covered in injuries. He's a madman. At this moment he really was quite fearful of Yi Xian. After all, Yi Xian is a madman. Bang! Meanwhile, Yi Xian was blasted flying again. Bitter King frowned slightly as he gazed at Yi Xian. Is there something wrong with you? Yi Xian crawled up from the ground, wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth, and then spoke fiercely. Continue. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged at Bitter King again. A ray of sword light tore through the battlefield. In the distance, Bitter King frowned slightly and punched out once more. At this moment, the four mysterious powers suddenly suppressed Bitter King. 4 domains. Being suppressed by the 4 domains, Bitter King's eyes turned serious. He punched out. Boom. Yi Xian was sent flying again, but Bitter King was also pushed back more than 10 zhang. At this moment, Yi Xian appeared in front of Bitter King again. Bitter King reacted faster than him and punched again. It was just a simple punch, nothing fancy. And it was this simple punch that sent Yi Xian flying again. Dozens of feet away, Yi Xian crawled out of the pit. Just as he was about to attack again, a man suddenly appeared in front of him. Rahu. Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian. Did you enjoy the fight? Yi Xian didn't say anything. Rahu glanced at the man's corpse and said, he did need to be taught a lesson for looking for trouble. However, his crime doesn't deserve death. Weren't you a bit too vicious? Yi Xian's face was expressionless. I've already apologized. Rahu shook his head. You killed someone and then apologized. You really are a genius. Yi Xian was speechless. Rahu suddenly said, come with me. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked towards the side. Yi Xian followed him and so did Bitter King. On the way, Rahu suddenly said, you need comrades and friends in this place. But you won't have any friends if you act like this. Yi Xian wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth. Banji said that the Dao tomb is very complicated. I don't want to be swept into such a vortex. I just want to kill the doubting. Rahu glanced at Yi Xian. The Dao tomb is very complicated, but you don't have to worry. In this heaven realm abyss, no one dares to play dirty. Here, everyone in the Dao tomb will be united. Yi Xian was silent. Rahu continued. Your biggest weakness now is that you lack battle experience. I want to send you to a place where there are battles every day and they are battles of life and death. Yi Xian asked, where? Rahu said, the Purgatory battlefield. Yi Xian frowned. The Purgatory battlefield? Rahu nodded. Not only are there experts from the Dao tomb, but there are also doubting. All the warmongers are there. Over there you can fight without fear. As for doubting, you don't have to worry. Zhen Wu and the others won't go there because it's a battlefield for the young. Of course. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. You might be an exception. Doubting will kill you at all costs. However, I will protect you in secret. If doubting has experts like Zhen Wu, I will stop them. Yi Xian nodded. I'll go. What he needed the most right now was battle. A crazy battle. Rahu nodded. He opened his palm and lightly waved it in front of him. Go in. Yi Xian directly entered the spatial fissure. After Yi Xian left, Bitter King suddenly said, "The goddess must be looking for him for the Tao scripture." "The Tao scripture?" Rahu said softly, "It's in Doubting's hands." Bitter King looked at Rahu. Rahu was expressionless. The goddess was killed by Doubting. The Tao scripture is also with Doubting. As he spoke, he turned and left. On the spot, Bitter King finally understood. In fact, Rahu suspected that Yi Xian did it. He suspected it too. However, they had no evidence. But did they need evidence? If they wanted to know if Yi Xian did it, it was simple. They could capture Yi Xian and find out the truth in countless ways. However, Rahu did not do that. Why? Because Yi Xian was valuable. Rahu wanted to train Yi Xian into a sword that could deal with Doubting. Moreover, the morale of the Tao tomb had greatly increased because of the goddess' death. They were united against a common enemy. Because Doubting had sent someone to kill the goddess and steal the Tao scripture, all the experts in the Tao tomb were enraged. It could be said that the Tao tomb was now more united than before. As for Yi Xian, wasn't it better to let Yi Xian fight Doubting to the death? Doubting Heavenly Palace. In the palace, True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, "He went to the purgatory battlefield." Bai Dizzy looked at True Martial Divine Lord. "Are you sure?" True Martial Divine Lord nodded. The White Emperor's son said softly, "It seems like the Tao tomb wants to nurture him." True Martial Divine Lord nodded. Not only is his sword Tao outstanding, but he also has 4 kinds of purgatory. His biggest weakness is his lack of battle experience. If he goes to that place, he can make up for this weakness. Once he comes out. Bai Dizzy looked at True Martial Divine Lord. "You do it." True Martial Divine Lord shook his head. "I can't. If I do, Rahu will attack immediately. Moreover, we have a rule. That place is a battlefield for the younger generation. The older experts of both sides cannot participate." Bai Dizzy was silent for a moment. "Inform all the younger generation of Doubting. Tell them to join forces and kill Yi Xian at all costs." True Martial Divine Lord nodded. "Yes." At this moment, the White Emperor suddenly stood up, his face a little gloomy. "Those brats are all very arrogant. They will definitely look down on Yi Xian." Hearing this, True Martial Divine Lord frowned. He would not look down on Yi Xian, but the younger generation of Doubting would definitely look down on him. Once they looked down on Yi Xian, it was tantamount to asking for death. True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, "Shi Ruo." As soon as he finished speaking, a woman suddenly entered the hall. True Martial Divine Lord looked at Shi Ruo. "Go to the purgatory battlefield and tell Guanshan not to underestimate him." Then he paused and said, "Tell him that Yi Xian can exchange 100 moves with me without dying." Shi Ruo nodded. "Understood." Then she turned and left. At this time, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "Wait." Shi Ruo looked at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy said solemnly, "Tell Guanshan to be careful of Yi Xian. Not only is he strong, but he is also very good at all kinds of dirty tricks. Be careful when dealing with him. Don't fall for his tricks. Also, if you meet him, don't talk about fair duels or morality. Beat him to death immediately." Shi Ruo looked at Bai Dizzy. "White Emperor Star Lord, the more I say this, the more they will be unconvinced." Bai Dizzy sighed. He felt helpless. He knew that the younger generation of Doubting was also arrogant, and each one was more arrogant than the last. But this Yi Xian was not simple. Dealing with Yi Xian, if one was not careful, they would fall for his tricks. Not to mention others, even he had a headache. Shi Ruo suddenly said, "I will act according to the situation." True Martial God nodded. "Trust Shi Ruo." As he said this, he took out a token and gave it to Shi Ruo. "This is the True Martial token. If necessary, use this token to order them around. Those who do not listen to you will be immediately expelled from Doubting and will never be hired again." Shi Ruo took the True Martial token, bowed slightly, and then turned to leave. Inside the hall, Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. "True Martial, do you think they can kill Yi Xian?" True Martial God was silent for a long time. Then he said softly, "If they unite and don't underestimate Yi Xian, then they have an 80% chance. But if they underestimate Yi Xian and give Yi Xian a chance." At this point, he didn't continue speaking. At this time, Bai Dizzy suddenly laughed. "Actually, it is not a bad thing." True Martial God looked at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy smiled. The younger generation of Doubting is the future of Doubting. These people need to grow. This time Yi Xian is a training for them. If they can kill Yi Xian, then it proves that doubting will prosper in the future. Even if they can't kill him, it doesn't matter. A failure can help them grow better. True martial god nodded. That makes sense. Bai Dizzy said softly, then let us wait and see. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Xian appeared in a mountain range. Behind him, the crack in space slowly closed. Purgatory Battlefield. Just as Yi Xian entered Purgatory Battlefield, all the doubting powerhouses in Purgatory Battlefield suddenly rushed towards Dao Mountain. Chapter 1364. Dao Mountain. Dao Mountain was the base of doubting geniuses in the Purgatory Battlefield. Originally, these doubting geniuses were training in various places, but they suddenly received a call from Guan Mountain. Thus they all rushed to Dao Mountain. Somewhere in the mountains, Yi Xian sat on the ground with a bonfire in front of him. Grilling fish. Yi Xian quietly grilled fish, deep in thought. After coming to the Purgatory Battlefield, he had been thinking about one thing. If he was doubting, what would he do? He would definitely kill Yi Xian. There were only two ways for doubting to kill him. First, True Martial God would act personally. If True Martial God acted personally, Yi Xian would definitely die. However, if True Martial God acted, Luo Ho would definitely act too. At the moment, Luo Ho was useful to the Tomb of the Tao. Therefore, Luo Ho would not sit back and do nothing. The first method would not work. Then there was only one left. Let the doubting geniuses in the Purgatory Battlefield kill him. Bai Dizzy and True Martial God were not idiots. They definitely would not let one or two doubting geniuses kill Yi Xian. In other words, there was a high possibility that the doubting geniuses in the Purgatory Battlefield would join forces. Thinking of this, Yi Xian silently took out a black robe. After the black robe on the ship, only his face was exposed. As if he felt that it was not enough, he took out a black half-mask and wore it. Now, unless the other party was an expert like True Martial God, ordinary people would not be able to use their divine sense to check him. Although he was not afraid of the geniuses here, he would not underestimate them. There were countless geniuses in the world. Yi Xian did not think that he was number one. There was nothing wrong with being cautious. After a while, Yi Xian picked up the grilled fish and started eating. At this moment, a powerful aura suddenly appeared not far from Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked up and saw a man walking slowly in front of him. The man held a dagger in his hand and walked sloppily. The Dao Proving Realm. Furthermore, he was at the peak of the Dao Validation Realm. The man sized up Yi Xian. You look a little unfamiliar. Yi Xian tossed the fish bone to the side and said, Is something the matter? The man's lips curled up. Robbery. Yi Xian looked at the man. Are you from Doubting or the Dao Tomb? The man frowned. Can't you tell? Yi Xian was puzzled. What do you think? The man pointed at the left side of his chest. There was a small black word there. Dao. Doubting. Yi Xian smiled and said, I'm also doubting. The man frowned. You're also a doubting? Yi Xian nodded. The man glanced at Yi Xian's chest and shook his head. There's no mark. Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and a surge of energy appeared in his hand. Godly energy. However, he didn't reveal too much. Thus the man didn't know what godly energy he had. Seeing the godly energy in Yi Xian's hand, a trace of surprise flashed in the man's eyes. Godly energy. You've obtained a great Dao inheritance? Yi Xian nodded. I am a Dao protector. The man sized up Yi Xian. How should I address you, brother? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, Yang Xian. Yang Xian. Within Yi Xian's body, the sword spirit suddenly trembled. Yang Xian. The man sized up Yi Xian again. Why didn't you go to the Dao Mountain? Yi Xian said in a deep voice. I'm looking for someone. The man asked, Yi Xian. Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. The man said in a deep voice, Brother Xian, Guanshan said that no one is allowed to look for Yi Xian alone. Yi Xian frowned. Is Yi Xian very strong? The man nodded. It said that he can exchange 100 moves with True Martial God Lord without dying. True Martial God Lord and White Emperor Star Lord have instructed us not to underestimate Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, So that's how it is. The man nodded. Let's go. Let's go to the Dao Mountain. Yi Xian asked, How should I address you, sir? The man smiled. Song Fei. Yi Xian nodded. Brother Song, let's go to the Dao Mountain. Song Fei said, Let's go. The two set off for the Dao Mountain. Along the way, Yi Xian would ask questions from time to time. Soon he had a thorough understanding of the entire purgatory battlefield. The entire purgatory battlefield was divided into two camps. One was the doubting and the other was the doubtum. The doubting was led by Guanshan, and Guanshan was the #1 genius of the doubting. His strength had reached the peak of the Dao Vindication realm and he was extremely powerful. The doubtum was led by the #1 genius of the doubtum, Fan Shuishui. It was worth mentioning that there was a mine in this purgatory battlefield, and that was the Fortune Divine Crystal. The main goal of both sides was to fight for this mine. But now the doubting's main goal was to kill Yi Xian. Guanshan had summoned all the monsters of the doubting. And in this purgatory battlefield, there were more than 100 monsters of the doubting, and the weakest was at the self-release realm. These people were all the most monstrous of the younger generation of the doubting. The doubting placed them here mainly to train them. At this time Song Fei suddenly smiled. Brother Xian, true martial godlord, said that if we can kill Yi Xian, each of us will be rewarded with 20 Fortune Divine Crystals. 20 Fortune Divine Crystals. If we are lucky we will only get 10 Fortune Divine Crystals in a year. I didn't expect Yi Xian's head to be so valuable. Yi Xian said seriously, Brother Song Fei, you are wrong. Song Fei looked at Yi Xian and Yi Xian said seriously, Brother Song Fei, why did the God Lord and the others give such a tempting reward? There is only one explanation, and that is that Yi Xian is not easy to deal with. Also, the God Lord and the others asked us to join forces. What does this mean? It means that they value Yi Xian very much, and Yi Xian is actually valued by the God Lord. Think about it, how monstrous is this Yi Xian? Song Fei nodded. Brother Xian is right. It is said that Yi Xian proves his Dao through killing, and his bloodline is extremely powerful. We cannot underestimate him. Yi Xian nodded. Yes, we must treat Yi Xian with caution. Song Fei smiled and said, however, I would like to see this Yi Xian for myself. I want to see what he is capable of. Arrogance. Although the God Lord True Martial had asked them to value Yi Xian, those who could survive in this place were all monstrous geniuses. Many people were not convinced that the God Lord True Martial valued a young man so highly. Yi Xian looked at Song Fei but did not speak. Soon the two arrived at the Path Mountain. The Path Mountain was a small mountain, and there were already 60 to 70 people gathered at the top of the mountain. They were all doubting geniuses. Yi Xian glanced at those geniuses from the Dao Palace. He had to admit that these geniuses from the Dao Palace were indeed very strong. Most of them were in the Dao Proving Realm, and judging from their auras, they were the kind that had nothing to hide. If these people joined forces he would not be able to defeat them. After all of them were veterans of countless battles. Especially a few of them, their auras were extremely thick. They'd attained the Dao Control Realm. Meanwhile, a man suddenly appeared here. He wore a dark robe, had long hair that hung loosely on his shoulders, and held a folding fan in his hand. He seemed very graceful. There was a woman by his side, and it was Shi Ruo who'd come from the doubting. Guanshan glanced at them and said, all of you should be aware of the reason I gathered all of you here. Meanwhile, a man suddenly said, is that fellow Yi Xian really that strong? Does he want all of us to join forces? Guanshan glanced at the man. Li Xing, can you withstand 100 blows from the God Lord True Martial? The man called Li Xing spoke solemnly. Can he really withstand 100 blows from the God Lord True Martial? Guanshan gazed at Shi Ruo. Shi Ruo stepped forward and glanced at the others. All of you are monstrous geniuses amongst monstrous geniuses. However, allow me to tell all of you that Yi Xian isn't simple at all. He proved his Dao by killing while he was in the doubting, and he killed the first swordsman of the doubting, Feng Daoxiu, and 2 other divine generals by himself. Besides that, he even challenged the God Lord True Martial. I can tell all of you that the God Lord True Martial didn't hold back at all. However, he's still alive. When she spoke up to this point, she paused for a moment and continued. His strength isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is that he's extremely cunning and likes to play dirty. So, all of you can't be careless if you encounter him. Below, another man smiled and said, Miss Shiruo's words make me want to meet this Yi Xian even more. Many people in the surroundings smiled as they chimed in. Shi Ruo sighed softly in her heart. As expected, all of these geniuses had their own pride. Yi Xian was merely at the Dao validation realm, so how could they possibly take Yi Xian seriously? Actually, if she hadn't witnessed Yi Xian's strength with her own eyes, she wouldn't have paid much attention to Yi Xian either. All of them had a head on their shoulders, so who would be afraid of whom? However, she'd witnessed Yi Xian's strength. That fellow proved his Dao by killing. Not to mention the younger generation, even amongst the older generation of the doubting, there weren't many who could defeat Yi Xian. Otherwise, White Emperor Starlord wouldn't have such a headache. Meanwhile, Guanshan suddenly said, Shi Ruo, what else did White Emperor Starlord and the God Lord True Marshal say? Shi Ruo restrained her thoughts and gazed at Guanshan. The reason they chose to make peace with the Dao Tomb was because they wanted to withdraw and kill Yi Xian. This person is a thorn in the side of the doubting. Do you understand, Guanshan? Guanshan nodded. I understand. Shi Ruo nodded slightly. Guanshan, I know your strength. Few of the younger generation are a match for you. However, if you meet Yi Xian, do not fight him one-on-one. You must gather everyone's strength to kill him and prevent any future troubles. Guanshan smiled. Actually, I'd like to fight him one-on-one. Fan Shueishui and I have been fighting for so many years and we have always been evenly matched. As for this Yi Xian, I really want to meet him. However, since White Emperor Starlord and the God Lord True Marshal value this person so much, I naturally won't underestimate him. If I find him, I will gather everyone's strength to kill him. Shi Ruo nodded. That would be best. At this time, all the doubting powerhouses had basically arrived. Soon they began to discuss how to kill Yi Xian. Yi Xian would also give some suggestions from time to time. The discussion was very excited. P.S. I won't ask for votes. Anyway, it's useless. I don't want to be humble anymore. I won't bow down for mere monthly votes. I treat money like dirt. I have no desires. Chapter 1365. How could they kill Yi Xian? This was the core of the doubting experts' discussion. Yi Xian watched quietly from the side. Damn it, these people want to gang up on me. Shi Ruo suddenly said, Everyone, if we want to kill Yi Xian, we must find this person first. Guanshan nodded. We must find this person first. Yi Xian suddenly stepped forward. Miss Shi Ruo, I think we need to be wary of two things. Shi Ruo looked at Yi Xian. What are they? Yi Xian said solemnly. First, we must be careful of Yi Xian sneaking into our midst. Shi Ruo frowned slightly. Sneaking into our midst? Yi Xian nodded. Didn't you say that Yi Xian is cunning? Therefore, I think we must confirm the number of people here. We cannot let that Yi Xian sneak into our midst. Shi Ruo pondered for a moment. That makes sense. Yi Xian looked around. We have 108 people here. Guanshan, do you recognize all of them? Guanshan shook his head. Although he was the leader of the doubting experts in the purgatory battlefield, he did not know all the doubting geniuses because they usually had their own things to do. They would only gather at that time when the fortune divine crystal appeared in the ore vein. Normally they would not gather together and would cultivate on their own. Yi Xian said, Therefore we must confirm the number of people here to prevent the Yi Xian sneaking into our midst. Perhaps not, but it is better to be safe than sorry. Guanshan nodded slightly. You're right. Yi Xian looked at everyone present. Everyone should get to know each other now. We will know if there are any unfamiliar faces in the future. Everyone exchanged glances. With the strength they possessed, they were able to remember everyone here with a single glance. At this moment, Shi Ruo suddenly looked at Yi Xian. You are? Yi Xian cupped his fists. I am Yang Xian, Song Fei's brother. Song Fei. Not far away, Song Fei was stunned. Brother? At this time, Yi Xian looked at Song Fei and said with a smile, From now on, all of us doubting are brothers. We will live and die together. Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Everyone, you must understand that our enemy is not only Yi Xian, but also the Dao Tomb. If Yi Xian enters this battlefield, do you think that the Dao Tomb will just sit back and watch? The Dao Tomb. The expressions of everyone here gradually became solemn when they heard this. Yi Xian continued, That's the second thing I wanted to tell you. It's very likely that Yi Xian will join the Dao Tomb. Once Yi Xian joins the Dao Tomb, then it will be extremely disadvantageous to us. Shi Ruo gazed at Yi Xian. Brother Xian, what do you think we should do now? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, It's very simple. We'll find Yi Xian before he joins the Dao Tomb and then we'll kill him. Guanshan suddenly said, So we have to find Yi Xian first. Yi Xian nodded. The important matter at hand is to find Yi Xian. However, I think that it's difficult to find him using ordinary methods. Just think about it, how could Yi Xian not be aware of our intentions when we're all gathered here? No matter how strong he is, it's impossible for him to fight all of us on his own. So, I think that Yi Xian will definitely choose to hide himself and attack us from the shadows. As he spoke, he gazed at Shi Ruo. Miss Shi Ruo, just think about it. If Yi Xian hides in the shadows and attacks us from the shadows. Shi Ruo's expression became quite unsightly when she heard this. After all, how terrifying was Yi Xian's strength. If such a person were to hide in the shadows, then everyone here would feel like a blade was pressing against their backs, and they wouldn't be able to rest at all. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "So we must lure Yi Xian out." Shi Ruo gazed at Yi Xian. How? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "The Divine Fortune Crystal." Yi Xian has attained the Dao Validation Realm, so he'll absolutely be unable to refuse the Divine Fortune Crystal. So, we can use the Divine Fortune Crystal to lure him out and kill him. Shi Ruo pondered deeply for a moment before she said, "I think that's a feasible method. However, I think that Yi Xian won't fall for it." Yi Xian spoke seriously. He will absolutely not fall for it if it's just a few Divine Fortune Crystals. But what if it's a lot? Shi Ruo frowned slightly. A lot? Yi Xian nodded. What if it's a few hundred Divine Fortune Crystals? A few hundred. Everyone's eyelids twitched when they heard this. A few hundred. They were only able to obtain a little over 10 Divine Fortune Crystals every year. A few hundred? That was insane. Yi Xian continued. Everyone, I think that this is a test given to us by Divine Lord True Marshal and White Emperor Star Lord. All of them gazed at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian spoke solemnly. White Emperor Star Lord and True Marshal Divine Lord view Yi Xian as a formidable enemy of our doubting in the future. Do they really think highly of Yi Xian? Under such circumstances, how could we be calculative about our own gains and losses? Everyone, if we don't unite and work together, then just think about it, how would White Emperor Star Lord and True Marshal Divine Lord view us? All of them fell silent. Yi Xian continued, this time we're not fighting for our own interests. We're fighting for doubting. Everyone, White Emperor Star Lord and True Marshal Divine Lord view Yi Xian very highly. This time it's a test for our doubting younger generation. If so many of us can't kill Yi Xian, then what hope does our doubting have in the future? Therefore this time we must kill Yi Xian at all costs. We must let White Emperor Star Lord and True Marshal Divine Lord understand that our doubting younger generation is not inferior to Yi Xian. Shi Ruo nodded slightly. Brother Xian is right. Everyone, White Emperor Star Lord has sent countless experts to kill Yi Xian, but they all failed. This time Yi Xian has entered the purgatory battlefield. White Emperor Star Lord and True Marshal Divine Lord want us to deal with Yi Xian. This is actually a test for us. If so many of us can't kill Yi Xian, how disappointed will White Emperor Star Lord and True Marshal Divine Lord be? Moreover, how will the younger generation of the Dao Court have any face left? Hearing this, everyone nodded in agreement. Although they all had their own ideas, they still had a sense of right and wrong. At this time it would be very stupid for anyone to play tricks. White Emperor Star Lord and True Marshal Divine Lord were not stupid. Usually one could have internal strife because only with competition could there be progress. But at this time if anyone were to have internal strife, the higher-ups would absolutely not spare him. At this time Yi Xian suddenly looked at Guanshan. Brother Guanshan, you are the strongest among us. You must bear the heavy responsibility of killing Yi Xian. You must not refuse. Hearing this, Guanshan, who had been silent, suddenly looked at Yi Xian. At this moment he suddenly had a good impression of Yi Xian. To kill Yi Xian we need everyone to work together. Yi Xian hurriedly cupped his fists and said, we'll definitely do our best to support Brother Guanshan. Guanshan nodded slightly. Brother Xian, in your opinion, would Yi Xian really fall for it if we use the Fortune Divine Crystals as bait? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. We can give it a try. Guanshan asked, how? Yi Xian thought for a moment and was about to speak when Shi Ruo spoke abruptly. We can do this. We can spread the news that a few hundred Fortune Divine Crystals have suddenly appeared in that vein. Guanshan frowned slightly. In that way the Dao Tomb will definitely hear of it and come over. Shi Ruo nodded. Yes, but Yi Xian will definitely come as well. Guanshan gazed at Shi Ruo. What do you think, Miss Shi Ruo? Shi Ruo said in a low voice. As far as I know, Yi Xian has just joined the Dao Tomb, and his relationship with the Dao Tomb is not particularly good. The reason why Luo Ho took him in is because he wants to use him to deal with me doubting. As for Yi Xian and Fan Shuishui, I believe that Fan Shuishui and the others will not fight us to the death for a mere Yi Xian. Yi Xian has just arrived, so it's impossible for him to have a deep relationship with them. Coupled with his special identity, I believe that they will not fight us to the death for Yi Xian. Guanshan thought for a moment, then looked at Yi Xian. Brother Xian, what do you think? Shi Ruo also looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian nodded. Miss Shi Ruo's words are very reasonable. This method is feasible, but the fortune divine crystals, Shi Ruo said with a smile, fishing naturally requires bait. She glanced at the crowd as she spoke. All of you should have a lot of savings. Each of you will contribute 5 fortune divine crystals. Once we're done, the 5 fortune divine crystals will be returned to you untouched. The crowd hesitated for a moment, then took out 5 fortune divine crystals. In a short while they had collected over 500 fortune divine crystals. He had to admit that this was a huge sum of money. As soon as the 500 fortune divine crystals appeared, an extremely pure wave of energy suddenly spread throughout the surroundings. Yi Xian glanced at the pile of fortune divine crystals, and no one knew what he was thinking. At this moment Guanshan suddenly said, "Let's go to the vein." It didn't take long for them to disappear from the Dao mountain. Before long they arrived at the belly of a mountain. On the way Yi Xian learned that the vein stretched for 800 miles. The first 400 miles were controlled by the Dao tomb, and the last 400 miles were controlled by the Dao Ting. Moreover, the vein produced a few thousand fortune divine crystals every year. Actually, it wasn't a small amount, but it wasn't much for everyone. After all, a vein only produced a few thousand fortune divine crystals every year, and those few thousand fortune divine crystals were shared between the Dao Ting and the Dao tomb. Guanshan placed the 500 fortune divine crystals within a cave. In an instant, the entire cave was filled with dense spiritual energy, and cultivating here was more than a few times faster than cultivating in the outside world. At this moment Yi Xian finally understood why the Dao tomb and the Dao Ting were fighting for the heaven abyss. Experts were the core, but the fortune divine crystals were actually the true core. Because fortune divine crystals could nurture experts. Meanwhile, a man suddenly said, "Fan Shui and the others are here. They're right outside." Guanshan spoke softly, "They really came quickly." As he spoke he glanced at the others. "All of us have to leave and only one of us can stay here. Because if all of us are here, then Yi Xian will absolutely not show himself. So, in the end he looked at Yi Xian. "Brother Xian, stay here and guard these fortune divine crystals. Notify us immediately once Yi Xian appears. If he doesn't, then keep these fortune divine crystals." Meanwhile, Shi Ruo was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Why don't we do this? Miss Shi Ruo stays here as well. Yi Xian is so strong and I'm not confident in my ability to deal with him alone. If Miss Shi Ruo is here, then even if Yi Xian appears he will absolutely not be able to kill me and Miss Shi Ruo in an instant." Guanshan thought for a moment and nodded, "All right. Both of you be careful. If I don't see Yi Xian outside, I'll immediately notify the two of you, and you must be ready to notify us at any time. If I find Yi Xian, I'll notify the two of you as well. At that time both of you keep the fortune divine crystals." Yi Xian nodded, "Understood." It didn't take long for Guanshan and the others to leave. Only Yi Xian, Shi Ruo, and a pile of fortune divine crystals that emanated dense spirit energy remained within the cave. Meanwhile, Shi Ruo suddenly gazed at Yi Xian and she stared at Yi Xian. "Brother Xian, why are you wearing a mask?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and then he said, "I'm too handsome. I'm afraid that women will ruin their lives if they see me." Shi Ruo was speechless. At the top. Chapter 1366. Inside the cave, Shi Ruo had a strange expression on her face. "Too handsome?" Shi Ruo sized up Yi Xian and smiled. "Brother Xian, do you think Yi Xian will appear?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't know. But I don't think he will refuse these several hundred fortune divine crystals." Shi Ruo nodded, "Yes." She turned to look outside the cave. "Brother Xian, I'll go out and take a look. You stay here and guard." Yi Xian suddenly said, "There are so many divine crystals, I'm a little worried that I'll be guarding them alone." Shi Ruo smiled. "Brother Xian, don't worry. If Yi Xian appears, inform us immediately. We'll be here in 2 breaths' time." She walked out of the cave as she said this. But right at this moment, a sword suddenly pressed against her forehead. Yi Xian had made his move. Shi Ruo slowly closed her eyes. Yi Xian smiled. "When did Miss Shi Ruo discover me?" Shi Ruo opened her eyes and looked at Yi Xian, who had appeared in front of her. What you said before. Yi Xian frowned. Which words? Shi Ruo said, too handsome, I'm afraid a woman will fall for him. Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, why? Shi Ruo looked at Yi Xian. According to my investigation, Yi Xian is a very thick-skinned person. No one else but a thick-skinned person could say what you just said. Moreover, you were wearing a mask, so I was wondering if you could be Yi Xian. Of course, I wasn't completely sure, so I wanted to go out and find Guanshan and the others. But now it seems that my guess was right. Yi Xian smiled. Mrs. Smart. Let me guess, you didn't call for help because you thought I could kill you in a second, right? Shi Ruo said solemnly. Yi Xian, you don't kill women, right? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Shi Ruo's expression relaxed slightly. At this moment, the soul-suppressing sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly sank into her forehead. Boom. In an instant, the soul-suppressing sword absorbed Shi Ruo's soul. His divine soul was destroyed. Shi Ruo's eyes widened in disbelief. Yi Xian smiled. I just don't kill my own woman. I still kill other women. As he spoke, he put away the soul-suppressing sword. Yi Xian turned around and looked at the pile of fortune divine crystals. With a wave of his right hand, all the fortune divine crystals flew into his storage ring. Yi Xian looked around and said softly, how should I deal with the aftermath? Outside the mine. At this time, the people from the Dao tomb were confronting Guanshan and the others from the Dao Ting. More than 500 creation divine crystals had suddenly appeared. Naturally, the Dao tomb would not give up on this fat piece of meat so easily. This time there were more than 100 people from the Dao tomb. Leading them was Fan Shuishui. In the air, Fan Shuishui looked at Guanshan and said with a smile, Guanshan, I heard that more than 500 fortune divine crystals have suddenly appeared. How about it, can we go take a look? Don't worry, we're just going to take a look. We won't rob you. Guanshan looked at the people behind Fan Shuishui and frowned. No, Yi Xian? At this time, Fan Shuishui suddenly said, what, are you looking for Yi Xian? Guanshan looked at Fan Shuishui. You know where Yi Xian is? Fan Shuishui laughed. Yes. Do you want to know where he is? Guanshan looked at Fan Shuishui. What's your condition? Fan Shuishui stared at Guanshan. 500 fortune divine crystals. As long as you give me 500 fortune divine crystals, not only will I tell you where Yi Xian is, I can also guarantee that we will not interfere in the matter between you and Yi Xian. Guanshan narrowed his eyes. Really? Fan Shuishui smiled. Really? So long as you're willing to give me 500 fortune divine crystals, then I, Fan Shuishui, and the others from the Dao tomb will absolutely not interfere in the matter between you and Yi Xian. Guanshan was about to speak when a voice suddenly resounded from within the mine. Brother Fan, it's a success. As soon as this voice resounded, a ray of light suddenly shot into the sky from within the mine, and then it vanished in the blink of an eye. The expressions of Guanshan and the others changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and then they charged towards the cave. Fan Shuishui's face was extremely gloomy as he gazed at the ray of light in the sky, and then he spat fiercely towards the side. Damn it. You even dared to scheme against me. You're probably tired of living. When Guanshan and the others entered the cave, they were dumbfounded. At this moment, Shi Ruo was lying silently within the cave. There was a hole in the center of her forehead and her soul had vanished. As for Yi Xian, even though Yi Xian wasn't dead, he was in a terrible state. At this moment, Yi Xian was leaning against the side of the mountain. There were over a dozen injuries all over his body, and it was especially so for the ones on his chest. They were so deep that his bones could be seen. It was an extremely shocking sight. Guanshan seemed to have thought of something, and he suddenly gazed at the fortune divine crystals. However, all of them had vanished. The expressions of Guanshan and the others instantly turned extremely gloomy when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian had arrived. Not only had he instantly killed Shi Ruo, he'd heavily injured Xianxia and taken the fortune divine crystal with him. Guanshan suddenly gazed at Yi Xian. Brother Xian, why didn't you notify us? Yi Xian shook his head. He was just about to speak when a mouthful of blood essence suddenly sprayed from his mouth. All of them were speechless. Yi Xian wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth and said, it was too late. He immediately attacked Shi Ruo as soon as he appeared. That attack. When he spoke up to this point, his voice suddenly started trembling. That attack was like a thunderclap. His sword was visible before the person could even see it. Miss Shirua didn't even have time to react before it pierced through the center of her forehead. I've lived for most of my life, yet I've never seen such a terrifying attack. It was truly too terrifying. That fellow Yi Xian isn't a man, he's a god. He's a god of the sword. All the others here exchanged glances when they heard this. Guan Shan had an extremely solemn expression on his face as well. He was clearly aware of Shirua's strength. Even though Shirua wasn't very strong, she wasn't weak either. He'd instantly killed Shirua with a single attack, so he had to ask himself if he could accomplish that. The answer was very difficult. Perhaps he, Guan Shan, could kill Shirua, but he was absolutely unable to kill Shirua with a single attack. Guan Shan seemed to have thought of something and he gazed at Yi Xian. He was just about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly spat out a few more mouthfuls of blood essence. Guan Shan hesitated for a moment when he saw this and then he said, "Brother Xian, recuperate first." Yi Xian nodded slightly, and then he leaned against the rock and slowly closed his eyes. Guan Shan suddenly spoke fiercely, "Fan Shui Shui." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. The others in the surroundings left as well. Guan Shan gazed at Fan Shui Shui from outside the cave. "Fan Shui Shui, what a great plan. Not only did you obtain crystals, you even killed him. You killed 2 birds with 1 stone." Fan Shui Shui spoke in a low voice. "Guan Shan, there's no relationship between us and that fellow Yi Xian." Guan Shan spoke fiercely. "There's no relationship? Are you joking?" Fan Shui Shui frowned. "Guan Shan, don't let Yi Xian use you. He's clearly trying to instigate a battle between us." Guan Shan suddenly roared furiously. "Fan Shui Shui, is Yi Xian from your Dao tomb?" Fan Shui Shui was speechless. Actually, Yi Xian really was from the Dao tomb right now. However, they hadn't taken Yi Xian to be on their side. After all, Yi Xian was from the 5th dimension and he wasn't on the same side as them. Meanwhile, Guan Shan suddenly said, "Fan Shui Shui, it's been a very long time since we sparred. Why don't we have a good spar today?" As soon as he finished speaking, he charged at Fan Shui Shui. On the other hand, the doubting experts behind him charged over as well. Fan Shui Shui's expression instantly became extremely unsightly when he witnessed this scene. Yi Xian. He knew that they'd fallen into Yi Xian's trap. Yi Xian hadn't just seized the Fortune Divine Crystals, he'd even shifted the blame to the Dao tomb. He's fucking inhumane. Fan Shui Shui didn't give it any further thought and charged forward as well. At this moment he could only choose to fight. While the 2 sides were fighting, Yi Xian continued to heal his injuries in the cave. His injuries weren't healing very quickly. Ever since he was discovered by Shirua, he understood that he had to be more cautious when doing things. As if thinking of something, the corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. 500 Fortune Divine Crystals. With these 500 Fortune Divine Crystals, the 5th dimension would be able to nurture even more super experts. Especially Arrow and Lanxio and the others. They would definitely be able to easily reach the Dao Validation Realm. Not only that, but there would also be more and more Dao Validation Realm experts in the 5th dimension. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly shook his head and smiled bitterly. Silly Sister Nian. Protecting the 5th dimension alone? Although Mu Nian had protected the 5th dimension, protecting the entire universe alone was really too stupid. The 5th dimension belonged to everyone. If the living beings in the 5th dimension didn't cherish the 5th dimension, then it would be useless for anyone to protect it. Yi Xian wouldn't protect the 5th dimension alone. This was because he knew that there was a limit to one person's strength. Only when all the experts of the 5th dimension united and protected together would the 5th dimension be able to live longer. And what Yi Xian wanted to do was to nurture even more experts. Of course, he also understood that the experts of the 5th dimension were united because of benefits. Not many people truly cared about the 5th dimension. But it didn't matter. Yi Xian could slowly nurture the next generation of people in the 5th dimension. If he couldn't change the thinking of this generation, then he would change the thinking of the next generation. It could be said that Yi Xian was serious about the future of the 5th dimension. He would protect the 5th dimension until the day Yi Xian died. This was his promise to Sister Nian. At this time, Yi Jiming suddenly said, "What are your plans now?" Yi Xian guarded his thoughts. He looked outside and softly said, "Guan Shan isn't a stupid person. After he calms down, he will definitely think about one question, and that is why I didn't die." Yi Jiming solemnly said, "Then how are you going to deal with it?" Yi Xian softly said, I won't let him think about this question. As long as my injuries don't recover in a short period of time, he will subconsciously ignore this question. However, there is a thorny problem now. Shirua's death will make them more wary of me. At this time they will be even more united. Not only them but the Dao Tomb will also. Moreover, the Dao Tomb will probably hate me to the core. Yi Ximing asked, then how are you going to counterattack? Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Let me think about it. Yi Ximing. P.S. What's a mere monthly ticket worth mentioning? That means no. Chapter 1367. Outside the mine, Guanshan, Fan Shuishui and the others were still fighting. It had to be said that this kind of battle was rare. Usually the two sides had conflicts almost every day, but they were all small-scale conflicts. It was rare for both sides to go all out. This battle lasted for more than 2 hours. Both sides stopped at the same time because both sides had lost more than 20 people. If this continued, both sides would perish together. In the sky, Fan Shuishui stared at Guanshan. You fool, you were used by Yi Xian. Used? A sarcastic smile appeared at the corners of Guanshan's mouth. Fan Shuishui, you stall me outside and let Yi Xian get the Fortune Divine Crystal. I have to say that you guys are cooperating really well. Very good. Fan Shuishui fell silent. Right now he really had no way of explaining himself. Was Yi Xian from the Dao Tomb? From the Doubting's point of view, Yi Xian was from the Dao Tomb because Luo Ho had sent Yi Xian. But from their point of view, Yi Xian wasn't from the Dao Tomb. They had never acknowledged Yi Xian. He had wanted to use Yi Xian to extort Guanshan, but he didn't expect Yi Xian to really appear. Moreover, he had killed an expert from the Dao court in an instant and framed him for it. Not only did he not gain anything, but he had also caused trouble. The more Fan Shuishui thought about it, the angrier he got. As if thinking of something, Fan Shuishui looked at Guanshan and sneered, Guanshan, from what I know, Yi Xian hates you to the bone, so you have to be careful. With that he turned around and left with the others. Guanshan and the others had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. Dao Tomb City, there were only 2 people in the main hall, Bitter King and Luo Ho. Bitter King said softly. Fan Shuishui said that Yi Xian was plotting against them. Luo Ho was expressionless. Won't he plot against them? Bitter King looked at Rahu. What are your plans? Luo Ho said softly. Yi Xian is a whetstone for the geniuses of doubting and also for the geniuses of the Dao Tomb. Tell Fan Shuishui that we don't care about Yi Xian. He can do whatever he wants. Bitter King was a bit worried. This. Rahu looked at Bitter King. Do you know what I thought when I first saw Yi Xian? Bitter King said, just speak. Luo Ho stood up and walked to the entrance of the hall. He looked at the horizon and said softly, let's talk about this person's strength first. At such a young age, his sword Dao has already reached the level of transformation. And he even has 4 types of domains. How terrifying is this? The most important thing is that this person dares to fight and put his life on the line. His ferocity reminds me of someone. Bitter King frowned slightly. Skyless? Luo Ho nodded, a complicated look flashed past his eyes. The ruthlessness on his body is too similar to Skyless. Bitter King fell silent. Skyless. He was one of the 4 great kings of the Dao Tomb. Not to mention Rahu, even the Lord had a headache dealing with this Skyless, because he was truly lawless. At this moment Rahu said again, in this chaotic world, you can't survive without a bit of ruthlessness. This person is not only ruthless but also decisive. The most terrifying thing about him is his intelligence. He knows how to take advantage of the situation and is tactful in handling matters. He is not pedantic at all. In this aspect, Skyless is not as good as him. Bitter King said in a low voice, can Fan Shuishui and the others deal with him? Can they deal with him? Rahu said softly, Fan Shuishui has 2 choices. The first is to befriend Yi Xian and become friends with Yi Xian. This way the purgatory battlefield will completely become the Dao Tomb's territory. The second choice is to ignore everything and let Yi Xian and Guanshan fight, then reap the benefits. This way the purgatory battlefield will still be the Dao Tomb's territory. Bitter King said softly, there is a third choice. To become enemies with Yi Xian. Rahu nodded. Although Yi Xian is married to the goddess, the Dao Tomb does not treat him as one of our own. Especially Fan Shuishui and the others, they will not accept Yi Xian so easily. In their eyes, Yi Xian is an outsider and an outsider who can threaten their position. Bitter King sighed softly. Yi Xian's existence would definitely make Fan Shueishui feel threatened, because he was afraid that Yi Xian would replace his position. After all, the current younger generation of the Dao Tomb was Fan Shueishui. But after Yi Xian came, this position was a bit uncertain. Bitter King said, if he really thinks so. Rahu slowly closed his eyes. Let's see what he chooses. Bitter King said in a low voice. Have you thought about the future Yi Xian? In fact, he was a little worried. The current Yi Xian could not threaten them, but that might not be the case in the future. Not only was Yi Xian strong, but his intelligence was also monstrously high. Rahu smiled. I know you are worried, but have you thought about who is the most worried the stronger Yi Xian becomes? Bitter King said, Doubting. Rahu nodded. Doubting is more worried than us. There is nothing wrong with letting Yi Xian become a sharp sword against Doubting. Purgatory Battlefield. Guan Shan and the others returned to the cave. At this time, Yi Xian's injuries had only recovered by 20 to 30%. Guan Shan and the others had ugly expressions. This time, not only had they lost more than 20 people, they had also lost more than 500 fortune divine crystals. What a bloody loss. As if thinking of something, Guan Shan looked at Yi Xian. Brother Xian, you fought with Yi Xian before. Is his sword really that terrifying? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said in a low voice, now that I think about it, I realized something. Yi Xian launched a sneak attack. If not for that, Miss Shi Ruo would not have been killed by his sword, and I would not have been so seriously injured. Guan Shan narrowed his eyes. Sneak attack? Yi Xian nodded. He was hiding in the cave and Miss Shi Ruo and I were not prepared, so... Guan Shan slowly closed his eyes. If it was a sneak attack, he could have killed Shi Ruo in an instant. After all, it was a sneak attack. Thinking of this, Guan Shan felt much more relaxed. After all, if Yi Xian had really killed Shi Ruo with a single strike of his sword in a head-on battle, then his strength would truly be too terrifying. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly spoke in a low voice. Looks like the Dao Tomb has joined forces with Yi Xian. We're in a very bad situation now. Guan Shan and the others had solemn expressions on their faces when they heard this. Wouldn't Yi Xian be like a tiger that had grown wings if he joined the Dao Tomb? All of them fell silent within the cave. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly sat up and he spoke fiercely. Everyone, the Dao Tomb and Yi Xian will absolutely not let us go. Since it's like that, why don't we fight them to the death? Everyone looked at Yi Xian when they heard this. Guan Shan spoke in a low voice. Fight them to the death? Guan Shan spoke in a low voice. Fight them to the death? Yi Xian nodded. Brother Guan Shan, just think about it. Now that Yi Xian has joined the Dao Tomb, do you think they will let us go? They won't. The Dao Tomb will definitely join forces with Yi Xian to annihilate us, and then they'll take the entire vein for themselves. If I'm not wrong, then Fan Shueishui and the others are definitely discussing how to eat us. Guan Shan's expression was quite unsightly. Meanwhile, one of the men spoke abruptly. Brother Xian, then how do you think we should fight them to the death? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, in any case they won't let us go. Since it's like that, then why don't we strike first and gain the upper hand? Guan Shan fell silent. Fight them to the death? Even though the Dao Tomb and the Dao Tomb were constantly fighting each other, they rarely fought to the death. Their main objective here was to temper themselves and obtain fortune crystals. Fight them to the death? Even though they fought with their lives on the line, they rarely fought to the death. It could be said that the purgatory of hell wasn't quite the same as it had been in the past, and it was much more harmonious. In the past, the purgatory of hell had truly fought with their lives on the line. But now both sides had a tacit understanding. As for the vein, you take half, we take half, and everyone develops peacefully. So when Yi Xian mentioned fighting them to the death, Guan Shan hesitated. Yi Xian added when he saw Guan Shan hesitate, even if we don't make a move, they will. Guan Shan slowly clenched his fists. Meanwhile, Yi Xian continued, we can do this. Ask Fan Shueishui to hand over Yi Xian because Yi Xian killed our Miss Shi Ruo. If Fan Shueishui is willing to ignore this matter, then we can only target Yi Xian. Guan Shan looked at Yi Xian and asked, what if he insists on interfering? Yi Xian suddenly spoke angrily. Yi Xian killed our people and seized our fortune divine crystals. Are we going to cower just because Fan Shueishui wants to interfere? Brother Guan Shan, think about it carefully. Even if we cower, will Yi Xian and Fan Shueishui let us go? No. They won't. They will only seek revenge in a frenzy. If we don't make a move now, then we'll lose the initiative, and we'll be in a very passive position once they make a move. Guanshan fell silent. Yi Xian continued, Brother Guanshan, all of you are aware that Yi Xian is a very devious person. If he keeps hiding in the shadows and plays tricks, then we won't be able to guard against him. Since it's like that, then why don't we just fight them to the death? I don't believe that the Dao Tomb will protect Yi Xian to the death. It doesn't matter even if they do. We have a chance of winning if we fight them head-on. But if we continue to be in a passive position, then we'll be in trouble. A man suddenly said, Brother Xian is right. If we don't take the initiative to attack, then we'll always be in a passive position. That's even more disadvantageous to us. Since it's like that, then why don't we fight them to the death? If Fan Shuishui doesn't care about Yi Xian, then we'll target Yi Xian. If he insists on interfering, then we'll fight them to the death. Another man said, Right, we can't continue to be in a passive position. We'll fight them to the death. It didn't take long for everyone to look at Guanshan. Guanshan fell silent for a moment before he said, All right, then we'll fight them to the death. Let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, he led the others away. Meanwhile, Yi Xian stood up as well. Guanshan gazed at Yi Xian. Brother Xian, are you going as well? Yi Xian spoke fiercely. How can I be left out at a time like this? I want to live and die with all of you. His voice stopped abruptly when he spoke up to this point. Damn it, I was too immersed in my acting and almost said my real name. FPZW. Chapter 1368. Soon the group went to look for Fan Shuishui. Kill Yi Xian. Yi Xian was also in the group. He had been secretly observing Guanshan. Guanshan's expression was calm after he came out of the cave. No one knew what he was thinking. Yi Xian had never thought that he was smart enough to play everyone in the palm of his hand. The fact that Shi Ruo had seen through him had made him even more cautious. Although Guanshan was a man of few words, he was definitely not a fool. If he was a fool, he would not have been able to survive in this place for so long. Fortunately, Shi Ruo, who was most familiar with Yi Xian, was dead. If Guanshan had investigated him like Shi Ruo had, he would have been exposed by now. Soon the group arrived at a valley. This valley was Fan Shuishui's group space. As soon as Guanshan's group arrived, Fan Shuishui appeared in front of them with the geniuses of the Dao Tomb. Fan Shuishui said coldly, Guanshan, are you really that stupid? Guanshan looked at Fan Shuishui. Where is Yi Xian? Fan Shuishui said angrily, I don't know. Guanshan frowned slightly. You don't know? Fan Shuishui said in a low voice, Guanshan, although Yi Xian has come to the Purgatory realm, he has not come to us. I said that I know Yi Xian's whereabouts just to extort money from you. As for Yi Xian's whereabouts, I really don't know. Guanshan fell silent. Fan Shuishui said again, If you find him, I can promise you that the Dao Tomb will not interfere. Guanshan slowly closed his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Fan Shuishui said again, Guanshan, Yi Xian is not a simple person. He killed someone, stole the divine crystal, and wants to frame the Dao Tomb. His goal is very simple. He wants us to fight to the death. Think about it, if we fight to the death and he comes out. At this moment Yi Xian, who was not far away, suddenly stepped forward. Fan Shuishui, are you joking? Fan Shuishui looked at Yi Xian. What's wrong? Yi Xian sneered. Fan Shuishui, is Yi Xian a member of your Dao Tomb? Fan Shuishui looked at Yi Xian. What are you trying to say? Yi Xian smiled and said, What is Yi Xian's purpose? It's the destruction of my Dao Ting. What is your purpose in coming to the Dao Tomb? Didn't they destroy my Dao Ting in the end? Why was Yi Xian able to come here? It was because the Dao Tomb had sent him here. If I didn't guess wrongly, the reason your Dao Tomb ground sent him over is definitely to exterminate us and monopolize this purgatory battlefields or veins. Upon hearing this, Guanshan suddenly opened his eyes and looked at Fan Shuishui. At this time Yi Xian said, Before Yi Xian came, neither of us could do anything to the other. But now Yi Xian is here. I dare say that you must have been discussing how to exterminate us and monopolize the entire purgatory battlefield. Hearing Yi Xian's words, everyone looked at Fan Shuishui with unfriendly expressions. Fan Shuishui's expression was somewhat gloomy. I said, I've never seen Yi Xian. Yi Xian sneered, Fan Shuishui, don't put on an act here. Today either you hand over Yi Xian or we'll fight to the death. Fan Shueishue's eyes flashed with a trace of darkness. Are you threatening me? Yi Xian suddenly pointed at Fan Shueishue in anger. I'll fuck your ancestors. Everyone. Fan Shueishue was instantly enraged. He directly punched out. In the distance, Yi Xian's expression changed greatly. He raised his arms to block. Bang. Before the crowd could react, Yi Xian was sent flying hundreds of feet away. In the end, he crashed heavily on a giant rock. Bang. The enormous rock shattered into pieces. On the ground, Yi Xian was just about to crawl up, but he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood essence. After that, he crawled directly into the pile of rubble, and his body trembled for a while before he completely stopped moving. He's courting death. Fan Shueishue frowned when he saw this. Damn it. I didn't even use much strength. Is this fellow so weak? Meanwhile, all the doubting geniuses were infuriated. Damn it. This is going too far. Before Guanshan could give the order, all the doubting geniuses had charged out. Fan Shueishue frowned when he saw this. At this moment he felt that the matter was slightly strange. However, he didn't have the time to think too much about it because the doubting geniuses had charged over. In next to no time the battle had begun. As for Yi Xian, he was still lying in the pile of rubble and no one cared about him. Amidst the rubble, Yi Xian's eyes slowly closed, and then he started to swiftly recuperate. Meanwhile, Yi Jiming spoke abruptly. What do you plan to do next? Yi Xian spoke softly. I've noticed a problem recently, and it's that both the Dao Tomb and Dao Ting don't want to engage in a true bloody battle. Because their strengths are on par, and a bloody battle would only result in both sides suffering heavy losses. So both the Dao Ting and the Dao Tomb wouldn't engage in a true bloody battle. Especially the Dao Ting right now. They view me as a thorn in their side, so they'll definitely try their best to eliminate me. The reason the Dao Tomb is protecting me now is because I'm useful to them. But if the Dao Ting gives up sufficient benefits, then the Dao Tomb wouldn't hesitate to abandon me. Yi Jiming spoke in a low voice. You must gather all the Dao scriptures and summon the Grand Dao's spirit. Yi Xian shook his head. I can't. I only have 5 Dao scriptures right now, and it's very difficult to gather all of them. I can't place my hopes on the Grand Dao's spirit. Yi Jiming agreed. Indeed. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Let me think about it. He couldn't take a single wrong step now, or he would be consigned to eternal damnation. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian felt an indescribable pain in his heart. Yi Jiming fell silent as well. The current Yi Xian made her feel slightly terrified, and of course she felt even more heartache for him. Yi Xian was taking one step and looking 10 steps ahead, and he had no choice but to do so. Whether it was the Dao Ting or the Dao Tomb, they weren't things that Yi Xian could go against right now. If he wanted to survive in these cracks, then he had to advance step by step, and he couldn't take a single wrong step. At this moment, the battle between Guanshan, Fan Shueishue, and the others had reached its climax, and people were dying at every moment. Fan Shueishue, who was fighting Guanshan in the sky, suddenly spoke fiercely. Guanshan, you idiot. You've been used by Yi Xian. Guanshan's face was quite gloomy. At this moment he felt that there was something fishy about the situation as well. Why hasn't Yi Xian made an appearance yet? As if he'd thought of something, Guanshan suddenly turned around and gazed at the spot where Yi Xian had fallen just now. At this moment Yi Xian was still amidst the pile of rubble. Guanshan suddenly disappeared from where he was. When he reappeared, he was already in front of the pile of rubble. With a wave of his right hand, the pile of rubble was immediately reduced to dust. He looked at Yi Xian, who was lying on the ground on his last breath, and was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. The next moment, a ray of sword light appeared in front of Guanshan. Guanshan's pupils constricted, and he instinctively raised his arm to block it. The ray of light sliced off his right arm, and then it pierced through the center of his forehead. A strand of blood sprayed. At this moment everyone here was stunned, including Fan Shueishue. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Guanshan gazed at Yi Xian with slight disbelief. It really is you. Yi Xian patted off the dust on his body. When did you notice? Guanshan gazed at Yi Xian. Fan Shueishue said that you, Yi Xian, would benefit the most from the battle between us. Since the beginning you've been constantly sowing discord between us and Fan Shueishue, and you wanted us to fight a bloody battle. So I thought of you. Moreover, Shiruo died in the cave, but you're still alive. This question had been in my mind since the beginning. However, I didn't have the heart to ask you when I saw that you were heavily injured. Of course, all of this was just my guess. I didn't dare confirm that it was you until you attacked. Yi Xian said, I'm sure now. Guan Shan stared fixedly at Yi Xian. I'm not convinced that I'm going to die at your hands. Yi Xian shook his head. I don't need you to be convinced. Guan Shan spoke fiercely. Yi Xian, why don't you dare to fight me fair and square? Why do you have to resort to such schemes? Yi Xian patted Guan Shan's shoulder lightly. Brother, all of you never intended to fight me one-on-one from the beginning. All of you were thinking about how to gang up on me and beat me to death. As soon as he finished speaking, the soul-suppressing sword trembled slightly, and Guan Shan's soul was completely absorbed. Meanwhile, all the doubting experts were looking at Yi Xian. There were less than 50 doubting experts left and most of them were injured. Yi Xian looked at Fan Shuishui. Fan Shuishui spoke fiercely. Yi Xian, how dare you? You even dared to scheme against me. You. Yi Xian suddenly pointed his sword at Fan Shuishui. I'll kill you if you say another word. Fan Shuishui's eyes narrowed slightly. You. Yi Xian vanished on the spot. In the distance, Fan Shuishui's expression changed. He took a step back and then he suddenly smashed his fist forward. This punch was like a torrent that surged through a dam, and a destructive force swept out and destroyed everything in its path. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword arrived before Qianxia. Everyone watched as that powerful force was instantly shattered. At the same time, Fan Shuishui retreated explosively by 300 m. Fan Shuishui's 4 domains enveloped him as soon as he stopped moving. In the next moment, another ray of light appeared in front of him. Yi Xian had attacked with all his might and he'd practically held nothing back. Fan Shuishui's pupils constricted and he hurriedly said, quickly attack. The experts behind him were about to attack. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly shouted furiously, I'm acting on Rahu's orders to kill Fan Shuishui. Who dares to attack? Acting on Rahu's orders? The geniuses of the Dao Tomb were stunned. What the hell? While they were still stunned, Yi Xian had arrived in front of Fan Shuishui, and a ray of light slashed down towards Fan Shuishui's head. In front of everyone's eyes, Fan Shuishui was directly cut into 2 halves by the sword. The geniuses of the Dao Tomb were stunned when they witnessed this scene. On the other hand, Fan Shuishui's eyes were opened wide even at the moment of his death. He hadn't expected that Yi Xian would kill him just like that. Yi Xian gazed at the geniuses of the Dao Tomb. From now onward, I'm your boss. Guan Shan is dead. So long as we kill these fellows from the doubting sects, then the purgatory battlefield will belong to our Dao Tomb. Will all of you accept such a great undertaking? The experts of the Dao Tomb were slightly tempted when they heard this. Both sides had been fighting in the purgatory battlefield for over 1,000 years, but a victor had never been determined. So, if they were able to determine a victor this time, then they would definitely be able to make a name for themselves in the Dao Tomb. Meanwhile, Yi Xian said, Rahu has ordered that everyone who captures the purgatory battlefield will be rewarded with 20 divine fortune crystals. Meanwhile, one of the geniuses of the Dao Tomb spoke in a low voice. Yi Xian. Are you telling the truth? Yi Xian suddenly spoke angrily. I, Yi Xian, am the #1 swordsman in the world, the #1 expert in the younger generation. Would I lie? Are you looking down on me? That genius hesitated for a moment and said, That's not what I meant. Don't be angry. Chapter 1369. 20 Fortune Divine Crystals. It had to be said that the experts of the Dao Tomb were very tempted. They had come here not only to train themselves but also for wealth. 20 Fortune Divine Crystals was not a small sum to them. Of course, the most tempting thing was the great cause that Yi Xian had mentioned. The Doubting and the Dao Tomb had been fighting for so many years, but there had never been a winner in the purgatory battlefield. Now, as long as they followed Yi Xian, the purgatory battlefield would immediately become the Dao Tombs, and all of them would become the heroes of the Dao Tomb. When they thought up to here, everyone gazed at the experts of the Dao court. At this moment, the doubting geniuses suddenly turned around and fled. Originally, they had wanted to kill Yi Xian. After all, they had the advantage in numbers. However, they did not expect that Yi Xian had instigated these people from the Dao Tomb. With the help of these people from the Dao Tomb, Yi Xian had no chance of winning. Run. Seeing the doubting geniuses fleeing, Yi Xian suddenly shouted angrily, Kill! As he spoke, he directly rushed out with his sword in hand. Very soon, the geniuses from the Dao tomb hesitated for a moment before they also rushed out. Around an hour later, all the doubting experts in the purgatory battlefield were killed. None of the doubting experts survived. On the Dao mountain, Yi Xian stood with his sword in hand. Behind him were over a dozen corpses. At this moment, the geniuses from the Dao tomb were also by his side. Everyone looked at Yi Xian with a trace of fear in their eyes. Although they had just joined forces with Yi Xian, they did not forget that Yi Xian had killed Fan Shuishui not long ago. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and said softly, "Why didn't the doubting send anyone to interfere?" At this moment, a man said in a deep voice, "The doubting will not interfere. As long as one entered this place, the experts of the older generation would not be able to interfere. Even if they do, we will stop them. It can be said that whoever enters this place is responsible for their own life and death." Yi Xian nodded. "Understood." The man looked at Yi Xian. "What do we do now?" Yi Xian was just about to speak when two figures suddenly appeared in the sky. True Martial God and Bai Dizzy. At this moment, both of their faces were extremely gloomy. Doubting all the geniuses had died here. Although these people were not top-notch powerhouses, they were doubting's future. Could be said that in the near future, there would be a gap in the backbone of the doubting powerhouses. Not only that, but from now on, the purgatory battlefield would become the private property of the Dao tomb. He had lost both his life and his wealth. In fact, Bai Dizzy regretted asking the doubting younger generation to deal with Yi Xian. Although Yi Xian was also from the younger generation, he was far more scheming than ordinary people could ever be compared to. Doubting younger generation, although not stupid when it came to scheming, they were far inferior to Yi Xian, who had climbed up from the bottom. Of course, the most important thing was Yi Xian's strength. Whether the doubting admitted it or not, Yi Xian was now the number one of the younger generation. In a one-on-one fight, even some of the doubting Sir Gods would not dare to say that they could defeat Yi Xian, let alone the younger generation. Bai Dizzy suddenly said softly, "True Martial, let's go." True Martial did not move. He was still looking at Yi Xian, his eyes filled with undisguised murderous intent. Originally he cherished talents, but now he wanted to kill Yi Xian even more. This person would become a great enemy of the doubting in the future if he lived. Yi Xian's threat wasn't weaker than the Dao tomb at all. Meanwhile, Bai Dizzy said, "Wait for the Dao ancestor to emerge from his closed-door cultivation." True Martial closed his eyes slowly. 3 months. The Dao ancestor would be able to reconstruct his body in 3 months. Once the Dao ancestor emerged, it wouldn't be so difficult for the doubting to kill Yi Xian then. As for now, even though he could kill Yi Xian, the Dao tomb would act as soon as he did. When he thought up to this point, True Martial took a deep look at Yi Xian, and then he vanished with Bai Dizzy. Luo Ho and Aku Wang showed up in front of Yi Xian when the two had disappeared. The experts of the Dao tomb bowed when they saw them. The experts of the Dao tomb bowed. However, Yi Xian didn't move. Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian. "Why did you kill Fan Shuishui?" His voice carried a strand of invisible might. Yi Xian's face was expressionless. "He obstructed me." Aku frowned slightly. "What did he obstruct?" Yi Xian said. "He obstructed me from killing someone." Aku looked at Yi Xian. "If you want to kill someone from the doubting, then there's no need to kill him." Yi Xian looked at Luo Ho. "From now on, the entire path of purgatory belongs to the Dao tomb. Besides that, the younger generation of the doubting is practically extinct. I've done what Fan Shuishui couldn't." Luo Ho fell silent. Aku's eyes gradually turned cold. "You still haven't answered." Yi Xian suddenly looked at Aku. "Aku, do you really want me to be so direct?" Aku frowned slightly. He was about to speak when Luo Ho suddenly said, "Go heal your injuries first." Yi Xian nodded and left. Luo Ho looked at Yi Xian, who was leaving in the distance, with a complicated expression. Aku looked at Luo Ho. What did he mean? Luo Ho said softly, "He was telling us that he, Yi Xian, did what we couldn't do. Not only did he kill countless geniuses from the doubting, but he also helped us obtain the mine in the purgatory battlefield." Aku said in a low voice, "But I said he killed him." Luo Ho shook his head. "In that situation, if he didn't kill Fan Shuishui first, Fan Shuishui would definitely stand by and let him be surrounded by the doubting experts. If he had been surrounded, he would have fallen into a desperate situation. Even if he won, it would have been a Pyrrhic victory. At that time, his life would have been in Fan Shuishui's hands. So he chose to attack first and kill Fan Shuishui. Then he lured the geniuses of the Dao Tomb to help him destroy those monsters from the doubting. Aku was silent. Luo Ho said, "Before I told you that Fan Shuishui had 3 choices. Unfortunately he chose the last one." As he spoke he looked at Aku. This time our geniuses were not as skilled. So, if we continue to ask him why he killed Fan Shuishui, we will only be humiliating ourselves. Do you understand? Aku said in a low voice, "This person is too dangerous." Luo Ho nodded. For a moment I wanted to kill him. But thinking about it, what is Yi Xian's goal? It's to destroy the doubting. His goal is the same as my goal in the Dao Tomb. We can cooperate with him. And he also sees us as a partner to cooperate with. Both of us need to understand each other. He uses us and we use him. Aku said softly, "It would be great if he was from our Dao Tomb." Luo Ho nodded. "If he really was from our Dao Tomb, even if we can't destroy the doubting, we will suppress them for the next 10,000 years. Aku shook his head. "What a pity." Luo Ho looked up at the sky and said softly, "In 3 months the Dao ancestor should come out of seclusion. I wonder if the Lord..." In the previous battles between the Dao Tomb and the doubting, the Dao Tomb had always been at a disadvantage because the Lord of the Dao Tomb was in seclusion. Once that Dao ancestor recovered from his injuries, if the great Lord of the Dao Tomb didn't come out of seclusion, the Dao Tomb would be at an absolute disadvantage. Aku said in a low voice, "In about 3 months, the Dao ancestor will be able to recover his body." 3 months. The two fell silent. After a while Luo Ho suddenly said, "Why don't we let Yi Xian go to the Heaven Realm Abyss?" Aku looked at Luo Ho. With his current strength, Luo Ho said softly, "He can." Aku said in a low voice, "The white-robed man is there." Luo Ho smiled. "Isn't it better to let Yi Xian fight with the white-robed man?" Aku shook his head. "He is not a match for the white-robed man." Luo Ho said softly, "We underestimated him. In terms of strength he is definitely not a match for the white-robed man. However, the scariest thing about that guy is not his strength, but that he is full of evil tricks. Let him fight with the white-robed man. Maybe he can help us salvage some of the situation." In the Heaven Realm Abyss, there were more than 1,200 superveins, and previously the Dao Tomb occupied less than 300 mines because the white-robed man was guarding there. The white-robed man. The number 1 divine general of the doubting. Hearing these 2 words, Aku's expression gradually became solemn. The white-robed man had fought with the Dao Tomb for countless years. Apart from that time when he lost to the Lord, he had never lost to the Dao Tomb. Even Luo Ho could not do anything to the white-robed man. It could be said that no one in the Dao Tomb was willing to face the white-robed man. Aku shook his head again. "I admit that in the future Yi Xian might be able to fight against the white-robed man. However, now Yi Xian is not a match for him. Moreover, even if we let him go, he might not necessarily go. If he doesn't go, we can't force him to go, can we?" Luo Ho said softly. "Although we took advantage of the Dao ancestor's seclusion to fight for some mines in the Heaven Realm Abyss, we are still at a disadvantage. Moreover, Yan Yaoyao needs someone to help her. Wu Man and I have to guard the formation outside and we don't know where Wu Tian is. Right now the most suitable person for the Dao Tomb is this Yi Xian." Aku still wanted to say something, but Luo Ho suddenly said, "Let him try." Aku looked at Luo Ho. "Is he willing to go?" Luo Ho nodded. "He will go. Because he cares about the 5-dimensional universe." After saying that, he disappeared. In Yi Xian's room, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. At this time his injuries had mostly recovered. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. "Knowing destiny, can you feel the Taoist scripture in the Tomb of the Tao?" Yi Jiming said in a low voice. "I could feel it before but now I can't." Yi Xian was silent. Yi Jiming said again, "How long will it take for you to break through?" Yi Xian shook his head. "It's very difficult for me to break through now." Yi Jiming suddenly said, "Can't you think of a way to contact the plain-dressed woman?" Yi Xian slowly clenched his fists. "Knowing destiny. Sister Nian is so strong, but she still can't beat Qing'er and Qing'er can't solve the cause of my calamity." Saying this, he opened his eyes and looked into the distance. "Knowing destiny. I'm very worried about Qing'er." In the depths of a distant starry sky, a woman in a plain dress who held a sword in her hand suddenly stopped moving. The space not too far away from her suddenly trembled, and then space split apart before a woman walked out from within the spatial rift. Moon Yanyan. Moon Yanyan looked at the plain-dressed woman and grinned. Hi, long time no see. The plain-dressed woman looked at Moon Yanyan. He's dead. Moon Yanyan nodded, smiled and said, yes. The plain-dressed woman was silent. Moon Yanyan suddenly smiled. It's really not easy to find him. Speaking of which, I'm very worried about him. Can he go back? The plain-dressed woman suddenly slashed into the distance, and in an instant the distant starry sky split open. Moon Yanyan looked at the torn space. Gradually she saw something and her expression became more and more solemn. In the end, the smile on her face completely disappeared, leaving behind only a solemn expression that she had never seen before. The plain-dressed woman looked at Moon Yanyan but did not speak. Moon Yanyan said softly, no wonder you have to leave him. It's been hard. The plain-dressed woman did not speak, but walked away with her sword in hand. After a few steps she suddenly stopped and said, I'm sorry. We siblings can't repay what we owe for now. Moon Yanyan said softly, now I'm even more worried about him. The plain-dressed woman walked away with her sword in hand. Even if the sky falls, I'll carry it. Moon Yanyan smiled. The great Tao has no end and the future is endless. Take care, young lady. The plain-dressed woman did not turn back. Never forget, there will be an echo. Young lady, we'll meet again. P.S. It seems that there are double monthly votes. I'm not asking for votes when I say this. I'm not asking for votes when I'm updating 3 chapters today. Anyway, I'm really not asking for votes. Chapter 1370. Inside the room, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. In front of him was a pile of fortune divine crystals. There were more than 1,000. This was because after killing the monstrous geniuses of the Daoting, he did not take everything for himself. Instead, he shared it with the geniuses of the Dao Tomb grounds. More than 1,000 fortune divine crystals. This kind of thing could only be found in the Daoting and the Dao Tomb grounds. Even the underworld did not have it, let alone the 5th dimension. When he saw this fortune divine crystal, he suddenly understood something. It was not that the people of the 5th dimension were not talented, but that they lacked this kind of cultivation resource. If the 5th dimension also had this kind of cultivation resource, then the people of the 5th dimension would definitely not be weaker than the people of the Daoting and the Dao Tomb grounds. No matter how talented they were, they still needed money. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly put away the fortune divine crystals and looked outside the door. Outside, a voice could be heard. Is it convenient for you to come in? Luoho. Yi Xian got up and walked to the door. He opened it and smiled. Senior Luoho, what's the matter? Luoho nodded slightly. There's something I need your help with. Yi Xian made an inviting gesture. Luoho entered the room and sat to the side. He sized up Yi Xian. Have you recovered from your injuries? Yi Xian nodded. I've basically recovered. Luoho looked at Yi Xian. I'll get straight to the point. The Dao Tomb land and the Dao court have always been fighting for the mineral veins in the heaven realm abyss. For the past 10,000 years, the Dao Tomb land has always been at a disadvantage. There are a total of 1,296 mineral veins in the heaven realm abyss, but the Dao Tomb land only occupies 320. The reason why my Dao Tomb grounds is at a disadvantage is because of one person. Yi Xian asked, who? Luoho said, White Robe, the #1 god general of the Daoting. Yi Xian was silent. He had heard of this person before. He was the strongest god general of the Daoting. He had only lost once against the Dao Tomb grounds. Luoho looked at Yi Xian. I want you to go to heaven realm abyss. Yi Xian picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip without saying anything. Luoho smiled and said, Before I came here, I sent someone to deliver 1,000 fortune divine crystals to the 5th dimension. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Senior Rahu, is there anyone in the Dao Tomb who can fight against White Robe? Luoho was silent for a long time. 2,000. Yi Xian said, Senior Rahu, I Yi Xian am not greedy. I want that mine in the purgatory battlefield. Luoho looked at Yi Xian, not saying a word. Yi Xian continued, Senior Rahu, at present, I'm definitely not White Robe's opponent. If I go to heaven realm abyss, it's equivalent to risking my life. What do you think? Luo Yi sipped his tea and said nothing. Yi Xian continued, In heaven realm abyss, there are 1,200 super mines. Luoho suddenly put down the teacup and took out a storage ring and placed it on the table. It's yours. With that he stood up and left. Xian took a look at the storage ring. Inside the storage ring was the mineral vein. Xian picked up the storage ring and left. Xian returned to the 5th dimension. In the main hall there were only Guan Yin and Xian. Xian handed the storage ring to Guan Yin. "I'll give this to you for safekeeping." Guan Yin looked at the storage ring and her expression soon became extremely solemn. "This is," Xian said, "Fortune Divine Vein. It can produce Fortune Divine crystals. This thing is what we lack the most right now." Guan Yin looked at Xian. "Where did you get it?" Xian said, "Heaven Realm Abyss." Guan Yin was about to speak when Xian suddenly said, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." With that he stood up and left. Guan Yin looked at Xian's departing figure, silent for a long time. Xian arrived at a courtyard. Just as he entered the courtyard, the door in the distance suddenly opened and Xianxia walked out. Xianxia walked in front of Xian and looked at Xian. Xian suddenly pulled Xianxia's hand and placed a storage ring in her hand. "It's useful to you." Xianxia said, "I'll go with you." Xian shook his head. "I need you to guard this place." Xianxia was silent. Xian said, 3 months, we only have 3 months at most, do you understand what I mean?" Xianxia looked at Xian. "Don't do anything stupid, we'll face it together when we return." Xian nodded, "All right." Xianxia suddenly grabbed Xian's hand. "I'm serious." Xian smiled. "I promise you." Xianxia looked into Xian's eyes. "Don't lie to me, otherwise I won't forgive you." She turned and left after she finished speaking. In the courtyard, Xian was silent for a long time and then he turned and left. He gave the rest of the Fortune Divine crystals to Arrow and the others. With these Fortune Divine crystals and Fortune Divine veins, he believed that Xianxia, Arrow and the others' strength would definitely rise to a new level. Xian arrived in the starry sky. He sat alone in the starry sky and not far from him was Moon Yanyan's main body. Xian sat alone in the starry sky for an entire night. The next day Xian got up and left. Heaven Abyss, Dao Mound City. Luo Ho stood on an altar and beside him was Aku Wang. Aku Wang said, "He brought the vein back to the 5th dimension." Luo Ho suddenly said, "Aku, how strong do you think Moon Yanyan is?" Aku Wang was silent. Moon Yanyan. This woman seriously injured a Dao ancestor with just 30% of her strength. This strength was indescribably terrifying. At this time Luo Ho said softly, "This woman is really terrifying." Unfortunately she chose to protect the 5th dimension. If she was willing to give up that place with her strength, it wouldn't be difficult for her to destroy the Dao Ting. Aku Wang nodded. Moon Yanyan being able to destroy the Dao Ting was not an exaggeration. She could seriously injure a Dao ancestor with just 30% of her strength. If she was at her peak, the Dao ancestor would definitely not be her match. Unfortunately, she didn't retract the power she used to suppress the 5th dimension. At this time Luo Ho suddenly said, "He should be at Heaven Abyss." Aku Wang said solemnly, "Can he deal with White Robe?" Luo Ho shook his head. "That's not important. What's important is that after he goes to Heaven Abyss he will go all out against the Dao Ting. If he can deal with White Robe, that's naturally good. If he can't, that's fine too. It's best if he dies at the hands of White Robe." Aku Wang looked at Luo Ho. "Why?" Luo Ho said softly, "We have always neglected one thing and that is the people behind Xian. Moon Yanyan is not the only one behind him. If he dies at the hands of the Dao Ting, those people will not let it go." Aku Wang said softly, "Can you find out who is behind him?" Luo Ho shook his head. "I can't, and that's the scariest thing." Aku Wang looked at Luo Ho. "After Xian went to Heaven Abyss, I'm a little worried about Yao Yao." Hearing this, Luo Ho frowned. After a moment, Luo Ho said softly, "Tell her to be careful of Xian." Aku Wang nodded and turned to leave. Heaven Abyss. When Xian arrived at Heaven Abyss, he had to admit that he was shocked. The celestial world abyss was a huge abyss in the starry sky. From his position, the celestial world abyss seemed bottomless. An abyss in the starry sky. Before Xian came here, he did some research. There were no records of how the Heaven Realm Abyss was formed, whether it was the Dao Court or the Tomb of Dao. Anyway, the Heaven Realm Abyss already existed before these two forces appeared. And in Heaven Abyss, there were more than 1,200 super creation divine veins. More than 1,200. What kind of concept was this? How many Dao-proving and Dao-controlling experts could be nurtured? In front of Heaven Abyss, Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then he directly entered Heaven Abyss. When Yi Xian entered Heaven Abyss, Bai Dizzy and True Martial Divine Lord also received the news. In the main hall, Bai Dizzy was extremely excited. He actually went to Heaven Abyss. He went to Heaven Abyss. He was naturally excited because White Robe was there. Who was White Robe? The first divine general of Daoting. He had only been defeated once in his life. In fact, he had wanted to mobilize White Robe to deal with Yi Xian, but the mineral veins in Heaven Abyss were too important. White Robe had to guard them. Otherwise, Daoting would not be able to suppress that woman in the Dao tomb. One had to know that those mineral veins were the foundation of Daoting. He had not expected that Yi Xian would go to Heaven Abyss himself. At this time, True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, "The Dao tomb deliberately sent him there." At this time, True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, "The Dao tomb deliberately sent him there." True Martial Divine Lord said solemnly, "Very likely." Bai Dizzy shook his head. Yi Xian is no match for White Robe. True Martial Divine Lord looked at Bai Dizzy. He is growing every day. Bai Dizzy was silent. White Robe was very strong. But Yi Xian was also very monstrous. Most importantly, Yi Xian was very cunning. This guy went to Heaven Abyss. Thinking of this, Bai Dizzy suddenly became worried. True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, "Inform White Robe and tell him to be careful of Yi Xian." Bai Dizzy nodded. "Don't be careless." True Martial Divine Lord suddenly said, "Did you find out who is behind him?" Bai Dizzy shook his head. "Not yet. So far we only know that there is a woman in a plain dress, a man in a green robe, the ancestral master of the sword sect, and the woman who fought with the Dao ancestor. However, we can't find out who these people are." True Martial Divine Lord frowned. "Even we can't find them?" Bai Dizzy nodded. "This is not normal." True Martial Divine Lord said solemnly, "Go and investigate personally. You must find out who is behind him." Bai Dizzy nodded. "Understood." True Martial Divine Lord said, "How strong is that woman in a plain dress?" Bai Dizzy said solemnly, "I don't know. I only know that she only uses one sword to kill people. However, the people she killed were all below the Dao confirming realm, so I don't know her true strength. But she shouldn't be weak. She should be at least peak Dao Imperial." True Martial Divine Lord was silent for a moment. "Can you find her?" Bai Dizzy said, "I have already sent 2 heavenly generals, Qianli and Divine Wind, to find her. It shouldn't be difficult for them to find her." True Martial Divine Lord looked at Bai Dizzy. "What happens after we find her?" Bai Dizzy made a throat-slitting gesture. Chapter 1371. Celestial Abyss. The Celestial Abyss was divided into the Southern Abyss and the Northern Abyss. The Southern Abyss was the territory of the Daoting, while the Northern Abyss was the territory of the Dao tomb. As soon as Yi Xian arrived at the Northern Abyss, a man appeared in front of him. The man glanced at Yi Xian. "The Celestial King wants to see you." With that, he turned and left. Staying where he was, Yi Xian kept silent for a moment. Then he followed. Along the way, Yi Xian constantly looked around. It was like a starry sky and his vision was dim. Everywhere was emitting a strange star-like light, which was very beautiful. What was worth mentioning was that the spirit energy here was very, very rich. It was the richest place he had ever seen. Even the 36 levels of heaven of the Daoting couldn't compare to this place. This was a true holy land for cultivation. At this moment, the man suddenly stopped. There was a pitch-black palace not far in front of the two of them. The Celestial King Palace. Yi Xian looked at the black palace and he sensed many extremely powerful auras around it. The weakest was at the Dao defense realm. At this moment, Yi Xian understood. Basically, all the experts of the Dao tomb were here. It should be the same for the Daoting. The man brought Yi Xian to the entrance of the palace, and he made an inviting gesture before quietly retreating. Yi Xian entered the palace. The palace was very spacious but also very cold. At the front of the palace, Yi Xian saw a woman. The woman wore a black robe. The robe was so black that it seemed to be weaved with ink. At the end of the robe there were several red flowers. The flowers were as red as blood and the redness was enchanting. It was the red spider lily. A white ribbon was tied around her waist, and the ribbon perfectly outlined her slender and hot figure. The woman wore her hair in 2 ponytails and she looked very neat and tidy. The woman's appearance was also very beautiful. Her facial features seemed to have been meticulously carved, and there was not the slightest flaw. It was unforgettable at first glance. Yao Yao, one of the 4 great kings of the Dao tomb, the heavenly king. The woman was also sizing up Yi Xian. After a while she slowly walked in front of Yi Xian and said with a smile, Luo Ho told me to be careful of you. Yi Xian was silent. Qian Yao Yao looked at Yi Xian. Before you came I investigated you. I can't say that I know you like the back of my hand, but I have a pretty good understanding of you. Yi Xian smiled and said, What does senior want to say? Qin Yao Yao turned and walked to the entrance of the hall. She looked into the distance and said, Rahu told me to be careful of you, do you know that? Yi Xian was silent. Qi Yao Yao continued, The doubting is afraid of you and so is the Dao tomb. Do you know that? Yi Xian was still silent. Qin Yao Yao continued, The doubting wants you dead and the Dao tomb also wants you dead. The difference is that the Dao tomb wants you to die at the hands of the doubting. That way the faction behind you will fight the doubting to the death. Yi Xian looked at Qin Yao Yao and hesitated for a moment, then said, Senior, perhaps we should be more tactful with our words. Qin Yao Yao turned and walked in front of Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and said, You killed the divine lady and the Dao scripture is still in your hands. Yi Xian, Qin Yao Yao walked to the side and sat down. She picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip. Let me guess, the divine lady wanted to marry you because she wanted to devour your bloodline. However, she underestimated your bloodline. Your bloodline is superior to hers, so she failed. After you killed her, you pushed the blame on the doubting so that the Dao tomb would fight the doubting to the death. That way you would have more time to develop. Yi Xian said nothing, his expression calm. Qin Yao Yao put down the teacup and looked at Yi Xian. Luo Ho and the others must have guessed that you killed the divine lady, but they didn't expose you because you proved your value. Your value is above the divine lady's. They want to use you and you also want to use the Dao tomb. Therefore both of us hit it off and everyone has a tacit understanding of each other. Yi Xian walked to sit in front of Qin Yao Yao and took a sip of his tea. Then he said, Senior, why don't we talk about something else? For example, my handsomeness. I can chat with Senior for 3 days and 3 nights. Qin Yao Yao smiled. You must be wondering why I'm telling you this right now, right? Yi Xian looked at Qin Yao Yao and said nothing. Qin Yao Yao got up and walked to Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and smiled a moment later. Welcome to the celestial abyss. With that she turned and left. Inside the hall Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. What did this woman mean? Outside the hall, Qin Yao Yao slowly walked down the stone steps. Behind her was a woman in black armor. The woman's face was covered and she held a long saber in her hand. Qi Yao Yao suddenly smiled. Mengwan, what do you think? The woman called Mengwan said hoarsely, Kill. Qin Yao Yao glanced at Mengwan. Why? Mengwan said in a low voice, A threat. Qin Yao Yao smiled. Mengwan, why break the Dao? Because the Dao is unfair, so we break the Dao. Mengwan looked at Qin Yao Yao and said nothing. Qin Yao Yao said softly, Mengwan, back then doubting treated us like this. If we threatened them they would kill us. And now how are we treating Yi Xian different from doubting? Mengwan said nothing. Qin Yao Yao looked at the horizon. Let's look at Yi Xian from another angle. Do you want to listen? Mengwan nodded. Yes. Qin Yao Yao said softly, Before we talk about him, let's talk about the 5th dimension Tendo Moon Yen Yen. Moon Yen Yen. Mengwan was silent. Who didn't know the 5th dimension Tendo? That extraordinary woman who could kill a Dao ancestor's fleshly body with just 30% of her strength. Her strength surpassed everyone's imagination. Qi Yao Yao said, in doubting she could have taken back her power and killed the Dao ancestor, but she didn't do so. Because if she did, the 5th dimension would be gone. And she didn't take back her power even in death. Mengwan, such a powerful woman, gave up her life without hesitation for the sake of her beliefs and protectors. What about us? How many people in the Dao tomb still remember our original intentions and beliefs? Mengwan said nothing. Qin Yao Yao continued, I admire Moon Yen Yen, but my greatest regret in life is not being able to get to know this woman. As she spoke, she looked at Mengwan and said with a smile, I admire Yi Xian very much. I admire his sense of responsibility, his bravery, and even more his resourcefulness. After Moon Yen Yen left, from what he had done, it was enough to prove that Moon Yen Yen had not misjudged him. From another angle, you will find that this person is loyal and loyal. Although he is unscrupulous, he has a bottom line. Meng Wan said in a low voice. He killed the goddess. Qing Yaoyao smiled and said, Meng Yi, there are only two reasons why the goddess wanted to marry him. First, she wanted to devour his bloodline, and second, she wanted his Tao scripture. The goddess' death was completely her own fault. To put it bluntly, she deserved it. Meng Wan was silent. Qi Yaoyao continued, the Dao Ting wants Yi Xian's Dao scriptures, and the Dao Tomb also wants them. However, whether it is the Dao Ting or the Dao Tomb, both neglected one thing. After Yi Xian obtained the Dao scriptures, he did not keep them for himself but shared them. The Dao Ting wanted the Dao scriptures, but in fact they had a better choice. That is to help Yi Xian and the fifth dimension Tendo to save the fifth dimension. This way I can guarantee that they would easily obtain the Dao scriptures. Because from all the signs, whether it is Yi Xian or that Moon Yanyan, they do not care about the Dao scriptures. However, the Dao Ting chose another path. Not only did the Dao Ting choose another path, the Dao Tomb also chose another path. Meng Wan looked at Qing Yaoyao. King Rahu and the others. Qing Yaoyao said softly, do you know why? Meng Wan shook his head. Qi Yaoyao suddenly laughed at herself. Because whether it is the Dao Ting or the Dao Tomb, they feel that they are superior. It is understandable for the Dao Ting to think this way. After all, they have always regarded themselves as the protectors of the great Dao, and feel that they are the keepers of order between heaven and earth. However, why does the Dao Tomb have such a thought? Why did we break the Dao in the first place? Because the great Dao is unfair, so we choose to break the Dao. Now how is the Dao Tomb treating Yi Xian any different from the Dao Ting? Saying this, she looked at Meng Wan and smiled. Meng Wan, what is the original intention of the Dao breakers? It is to break the Dao and return a bright world to the world. But now many Dao breakers break the Dao in order to become the next Dao Ting. Meng Wan said solemnly, King Yi Xian is only using the Dao Tomb. Qing Yaoyao smiled. When you use others, others will naturally use you. Saying this, she looked into the distance and said softly, if I am not wrong, White Robe already knows that Yi Xian has come to the heaven abyss. Meng Wan said, what will he do? Qing Yaoyao smiled. Guess. Meng Wan shook his head. I can't guess. Qing Yaoyao laughed. Pass down my order, have the 12 Daoists come to see me. As she spoke, she walked towards the distance. As if she had thought of something, she suddenly stopped and said, besides that, have Yi Xian come as well? Meng Wan bowed slightly before turning around and leaving. The Southern Abyss. A man suddenly appeared outside a pitch-black palace. He was just about to enter when a black-clothed old man blocked his way. The man hurriedly bowed slightly when he saw the old man. Please notify Divine General White Robe that I have come on the orders of Star-Lord White Emperor and Divine Lord True Marshal. I have something to tell Divine General White Robe. The black-clothed old man turned around and left. A short while later, the black-clothed old man appeared in front of the man again. Speak. The man hesitated for a moment and said, Yi Xian has entered the heaven abyss. Please kill him and remove a great threat to the Dao Ting. The black-clothed old man said softly, understood. The man glanced at the black-clothed old man, and then he turned around and left without saying another word. After the man left, the black-clothed old man looked at the white-clothed old man in the hall. Divine General, what do you think? After a long period of silence, a voice slowly drifted out. Everything as usual. P.S. Thank you to all the friends who have tipped, thank you. As for the monthly votes, insist on not asking for monthly votes on the second day. Chapter 1372. The Main Hall of the Southern Abyss. At this moment, there were a total of 26 people within the hall, and all of them were at the peak of the Dao defense realm. Their leader was Qi Yaoyao and Yi Xian was amongst them. During this time, some of them frequently sized up Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't speak and just sat there silently. Qi Yaoyao glanced at them and said, I just received news that another 2 low-grade mines have fallen into the Doubting's hands. The expressions of everyone here turned gloomy when they heard this. Qi Yaoyao picked up the teacup on the table by her side, walked over to the center of the hall, and then lightly swiped the ground with her left hand. A map suddenly appeared on the ground. It was a map of the celestial abyss. Qi Yaoyao opened the lid of the teacup, took a light sip and then said, their next target is probably the Mang Mountain mines. The expressions of everyone here changed when they heard this. The Mang Mountain mines. That was a top-grade mine. There were over 1,000 mines in the celestial abyss, but there were less than 36 of them. Moreover, the Dao tomb only had 6 of them. It could be said that every single one of them was extremely important to the Dao tomb. On the other hand, a single top-grade mine could produce at least 100,000 divine fortune crystals every single year. Once it was lost, then it meant that the income of everyone within the Dao tomb would suffer a sharp decline. Meanwhile, Qi Yaoyao glanced at them and asked, "What do all of you think?" A black-robed old man spoke abruptly, "Mang Mountain mines can't fall into the hands of the Dao Ting." Qi Yaoyao smiled and said, "I know that it can't fall into the hands of the Dao Ting. I'm asking if all of you have any countermeasures." The black-robed old man spoke in a low voice, "Who's the Dao Ting?" Qi Yaoyao replied, "The White Cloak Army's vanguard, Bailey Tu." Bailey Tu. The expressions of everyone here grew even gloomier when they heard this. Bailey Tu wasn't an ordinary person. He was the Doubting Divine General's vanguard, and he was called the madman of the battlefield. He was a complete madman on the battlefield. Moreover, he had a nickname on the battlefield, the Doubting White Robe Jr. This was a person who gave the Dao tomb a huge headache. Seeing that everyone was silent, Qin Yaoyao smiled and said, "Why? Is everyone not saying anything?" The black-robed old man said, "Celestial King, I presume you already have a candidate in mind. Speak frankly. No matter who you have in mind, no one will refuse." Qi Yaoyao suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Let me introduce a new friend to everyone. His name is Yi Xian and he comes from the 5th dimension. I think everyone should have heard of him." Everyone looked at Yi Xian in unison. Yi Xian sipped his tea in silence. Qi Yaoyao suddenly said, "The meeting is over." Everyone was stunned. The meeting ended just like that. What the hell? Qin Yaoyao looked at the crowd. "Don't you understand what I'm saying?" Everyone hurriedly left. Yi Xian also turned to leave, but Qin Yaoyao stopped him. Qin Yaoyao smiled and said, "You stay." Yi Xian. Soon only Yi Xian and Qin Yaoyao were left in the hall. Qin Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian with a spurious smile. "Are you panicking?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "I can still hold on." Qin Yaoyao sat to the side and looked at Yi Xian. "Why did you come to the celestial abyss this time?" Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao. "What does senior want to say?" Qin Yaoyao smiled. "You can call me Yaoyao." Yi Xian fell silent. He couldn't see through this woman. Qi Yaoyao said, "The Dao tomb wants to sacrifice you. Do you know that?" Yi Xian said, "Why are you telling me this?" Qin Yaoyao got up and walked in front of Yi Xian. "How about this, you help me and I help you?" Yi Xian frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Qin Yaoyao smiled. "Bailey Tu's goal is Mount Mang. You go and guard it for me. After that I will give you 10% of the annual output of Mount Mang's supreme grade mine." Yi Xian fell silent. Qin Yaoyao continued, 10% is 10,000 fortune divine crystals. 10,000 fortune divine crystals can help some of your friends reach the Dao defense realm. Don't haggle, because if I give too much, others in the Dao tomb will think otherwise. Do you want this deal or not? Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao. "Why don't you let others go?" Qin Yaoyao smiled. "Did you see that? No one asked to go. Why didn't they ask to go? Because going to Mount Mang is to risk their lives. Bailey Tu is a famous madman. Who would want to risk their lives against him? Wouldn't it be better to just sit at home and split the money?" Yi Xian fell silent. Qin Yaoyao picked up her teacup and took a sip. "You took over 100 spirit veins from the Doubting to the 5th dimension. Now that everything in the 5th dimension is recovering, the spirit chi is getting better and better. However, do you know what the 5th dimension lacks the most? It lacks experts. Without the fortune divine crystals, even if you have the Dao scripture, you won't be able to help your friends reach the Dao defense realm." As she spoke, she glanced at Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't say anything. Qin Yaoyao continued, "There are many people in the Dao tomb who want you to die at the hands of the Doubting because they are afraid that you will become a threat to the Dao tomb when you grow stronger. The Doubting also wants you dead. Can be said that both the Dao tomb and the Doubting want you dead. The only difference is that the Dao tomb will not kill you first. If you want to change your current situation, there is only one way, and that is to continue to prove your worth." Yi Xian smiled. "Help the Dao tomb obtain more spirit veins?" Qin Yaoyao nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Qin Yaoyao smiled. "I guard the heaven abyss and my situation here is not very good. If you can help me, I can promise you that as long as you are in the heaven abyss I will protect you. Doubting will kill you, I will fight the doubting, I will kill you, I will attack the Dao tomb. Yi Xian looked at Qian Yaoyao. Are you trying to trick me? Qian Yaoyao took a sip of spirit tea and said, do you have any other better choices? If you do, I will respect your choice. Yi Xian chuckled. Miss Yaoyao, there is one thing I don't understand. I hope you can explain it to me. Qi Yaoyao said, ask away. Yi Xian said, I have no great enmity with the Dao tomb. Why does the Dao tomb want me dead? Qian Yaoyao looked at Yi Xian. You have the Dao scripture. Not only does the doubting want it, it is also what the Dao tomb wants. Moreover, you are too outstanding. Outstanding to the point that the doubting and the Dao tomb fear you. Yi Xian said softly, I have no enmity towards the Dao tomb. I just want to destroy the doubting. Qin Yaoyao smiled. What will happen after we destroy the doubting? Yi Xian fell silent. Qin Yao chuckled and said, they see further than you. Not only do they see the future, but they also see the future. You are at the Dao validation realm now. What if you reach the Dao controlling realm or achieve the Dao? For example, if your big sister Nian is still here and she wants the heaven abyss's mine, do you think the Dao tomb will give it to her or not? Yi Xian said nothing. Qi Yaoyao said, no matter if it's the Dao court or the Dao tomb, we don't want a second person as powerful as Moon Yanyan to appear because it will threaten our interests. Especially when you, Yi Xian, have the 5 scriptures. Do you think we will let you collect all the Dao scriptures? We won't. As she said that, she smiled slightly. In this world there are many times when being too outstanding is a sin, because you will threaten others, even if you have no intention of harming them. For example, if a poisonous snake passes by on the street, even if it doesn't bite, people will still choose to kill it. Why? Because it can threaten everyone, so it must die. As for you, Yi Xian, you are even more of a threat than a poisonous snake. Of course, there is another reason why they want you dead. If you die at the hands of the doubting, the people behind you will fight the doubting to the death. At that time, the Dao tomb will be able to reap the benefits. Yi Xian looked at Qin Yaoyao. Don't you want me to die at the hands of the doubting? Qin Yaoyao smiled. Why would I want you to die at the hands of the doubting? Yi Xian looked straight at Qin Yaoyao. Why not? Qin Yaoyao smiled. I cannot represent the entire Dao tomb, and Rahu and the others cannot represent the entire Dao tomb. Yi Xian was silent. Qin Yaoyao smiled. Although you are not at the Dao controlling realm, your strength far exceeds that of an ordinary Dao controlling realm cultivator. Most importantly, you are smart. If you help me, the Dao tomb's situation in the heaven abyss will be better. I also believe that you did not come to the heaven abyss for fun. In that case, why can't we work together? I need you to help me, and you need me to help you fend off some people you cannot fend off right now. What do you think? Yi Xian suddenly stood up and looked at Qin Yaoyao. Happy working with you. The corners of Qin Yaoyao's mouth lifted. Happy working with you. Yi Xian turned and left. Qi Yaoyao suddenly said, aren't you going to propose something else? Outside the hall, Yi Xian's voice sounded. If I propose it now, will you agree? Inside the hall, Qin Yaoyao shook her head with a smile. What a smart guy. Then she picked up her teacup and drained it in one gulp. Mengwan, pass down my order. From now on, all the experts of Mount Mang are under Yi Xian's command. Mengwan turned and left. At this time, Qi Yaoyao said, give him 10 Dao breakers. The Dao breaking army. Not everyone in the Dao tomb was a Dao breaker. Many of them were experts that had been nurtured in the later stages of the Dao tomb. There was an extremely mysterious army in the Dao tomb. This army was made up entirely of Dao breakers, and they were extremely strong. Only this army could go against the White Cloak army. As for the Dao breaking army, even one of the 4 kings, Chen Yaoyao, could only mobilize 50 people. This was the core army of the Dao tomb, there was no other. Mengwan hesitated and was about to speak when Chen Yaoyao said softly, you go as well. Do whatever he asks you to do. Mengwan didn't ask anything else. He turned and left. In the hall, Qi Yaoyao twirled the teacup in her hand and said softly, pass down my order to Luo Ho. Yi Xian is now mine. No one in the Dao tomb is allowed to have any ideas about him. Otherwise, don't blame me for turning hostile. Yes. A voice suddenly sounded in the hall. Chapter 1373. Yi Xian headed for Mount Mang. Along the way, Yi Jiming suddenly asked, do you trust that woman? Yi Xian replied softly, I have no better choice at the moment. Yi Jiming said solemnly, this woman is not simple, you have to be careful. Yi Xian nodded, I know. Saying so, he slowly closed his eyes. What did the current five-dimensional universe need the most? He was an expert. In order to nurture experts, one must have the Fortune Divine Crystal. The amount of Fortune Divine Crystals he had obtained previously was too little, too little. Now the only place with Fortune Crystals was the Celestial Abyss. But this fat piece of meat had already been occupied by the Dao Ting and the Dao Tomb. Could he snatch food from the tiger's mouth? Yi Xian was silent for a long time, then said softly, Ximing, I have always been curious about Sister Nian's level. Yi Ximing said solemnly, her strength is definitely above Dao attainment. Above Dao attainment. Yi Xian frowned. What realm was above Dao attainment? And Qing, what level was she at? Was there really no end to martial path and sword path? At this moment, a mountain range appeared in the distance. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at the mountain range. Mount Mang. Yi Xian was about to speed up when 100 people suddenly charged in his direction. Yi Xian frowned. Soon, the 100 people were in front of him, but they did not stop, continuing to charge into the distance. But soon they were stopped by a woman. Meng Wan. Yan Yaoyao's armed guard. Behind Meng Wan were 10 people, their auras as deep as the vast starry sky, extremely powerful. Seeing Meng Wan, they hurriedly bowed respectfully. Meng Wan looked coldly at them. Mount Mang has fallen? The man in the lead said in a trembling voice. Miss Meng Wan, Bailey too has already killed his way to Mount Mang. Commander Mu Feng has been imprisoned. It was lost. Meng Wan frowned, glancing at Mount Mang, then at Yi Xian. Yi Xian also heard the man's words. Mount Mang had fallen. Yi Xian was silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Meanwhile, Meng Wan suddenly pointed at Yi Xian and said, He's your new commander. Everyone in the surroundings gazed at Yi Xian with strange expressions when they heard this. At this time Meng Wan looked at Yi Xian. From now on they will obey your orders. Yi Xian shook his head. Let them go back. Meng Wan frowned at Yi Xian. What do you mean? Yi Xian glanced at those people, his face expressionless. Look, they're already scared out of their wits. What's the use of keeping them? The experts here were instantly infuriated when they heard this, and the man who spoke earlier stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Are you insulting us? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. A ferocious expression instantly appeared on the man's face. However, he didn't attack and he just stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian walked over to the man and then he pointed at his chest. Hit me. Do you dare? The man clenched his fists tightly but he didn't attack. He hadn't forgotten what Meng Wan had said. Yi Xian was their commander now. Yi Xian glanced at the 100+ people here. None of you have the balls. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Meanwhile, the man suddenly spoke furiously. You're insulting us. The experts here gazed furiously at Yi Xian as well. Yi Xian stopped moving and then he turned around to gaze at the man and the others. I looked at all of you. All of you aren't injured. What does that mean? It means that Bailey too seized Mount Mang without any effort at all. As for all of you, none of you chose to resist, right? The experts here instantly revealed unsightly expressions. They really hadn't resisted before they'd fled. Meng Wan's expression instantly turned icy cold when he noticed their expressions. Meng Wan's expression gradually turned cold when he saw everyone's expressions. Yi Xian sneered, I said you guys have no guts. Am I wrong? With that he turned around and left. At this moment, the man suddenly stood in front of Yi Xian and stared at Yi Xian. Do you know how terrifying Bailey 2 is? Yi Xian shook his head. I don't know. The man said fiercely, then what right do you have to insult us? Yi Xian was silent. The powerhouses started to criticize Yi Xian and some of them even wanted to beat him up. Beside him, Meng Wan's expression was extremely grim. Yi Xian looked at Meng Wan. How should I address you, young lady? Meng Wan looked at Yi Xian. Meng Wan. Yi Xian nodded. Miss Meng Yi, did you just say that they are all under my control? Meng Wan nodded. Yes. Yi Xian looked at the man and the others. I'm willing to give all of you a chance. Now I'm going to reclaim Mount Mang. Are any of you willing to come with me? No one spoke. The man sneered. You're courting death. Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. The man's head flew into the air before he could even react. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian killed someone. Meng Wan was slightly stunned as well. She hadn't expected that Yi Xian would suddenly kill someone. Yi Xian glanced at them. Protecting Mount Mang is your duty. However, all of you fled without a fight and surrendered Mount Mang to us. Let me ask all of you, do all of you have the face to go back? Even if all of you go back, won't you feel ashamed when you face King Mang? Meanwhile, a man with a spear in his hand said in a low voice, Bailey too is very strong. Yi Xian gazed at the man. Losing isn't terrifying. What's terrifying is admitting defeat without even fighting. As he spoke, he gazed at Meng Wan. Miss Meng Wan, give the order that all the generals of Mount Mang flee without a fight. Inscribe the names of all the generals of Mount Mang on stone steels and place them before the Grand Hall of the Dao Tomb Hall for all the experts of our Dao Tomb to see. Moreover, notify the entire Dao Tomb Hall. The expressions of all of them became extremely unsightly when they heard this. Meng Wan glanced at Yi Xian. I'll make the arrangements. Yi Xian nodded. Let's go to Mount Mang. As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the distance. Meng Wan glanced coldly at them. What a disgrace. As she spoke, she led the 10 Dao breakers behind her and left. All of them didn't flee and all of them fell silent. Meanwhile, someone suddenly asked, Who's that man? The man with a spear glanced at the ray of light in the distance. He should be Yi Xian. Yi Xian. Someone exclaimed, the Yi Xian who killed all the doubting geniuses in the purgatory battlefield? Another exclaimed, it's actually him. He's that Yi Xian who challenged the true martial divine monarch. Suddenly someone asked, can he defeat Bailey too? The man with a spear spoke ferociously, everyone, if we return just like that, then we'll really become the shame of the entire Dao Tomb Hall. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. Some of the others hurriedly charged forward as well. However, there weren't many of them. There were less than 30 of them. The others didn't choose to follow him. As far as the others were concerned, charging forward was no different than giving their lives away. Meng Wan suddenly appeared by Yi Xian's side. Just us. Yi Xian stopped and turned around to look at the 10 people by Meng Wan's side. All 10 of them were looking at Yi Xian with calm expressions. Yi Xian nodded. That's enough. Meng Wan was just about to speak when the spearman and the others suddenly flashed over from afar. There was a trace of surprise in Meng Wan's eyes as he gazed at the spearman and the others. The spearman and the others walked over to Yi Xian, and then he gazed at Yi Xian. We're with you. Yi Xian asked, what's your name? The spearman replied, Zhou Xian. Yi Xian nodded slightly and then he gazed at Meng Wan. Miss Meng Wan, order the 10 people behind you to kill all the others who didn't come. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. Meng Wan was stunned as well. Kill all of them? Yi Xian smiled when he saw Meng Wan not react. So my words don't work? Meng Wan gazed at Yi Xian. This matter is of great importance. I need to consult the Heavenly King. Yi Xian suddenly gazed at the 10 Dao breakers. Did the Heavenly King ask all of you to obey my orders? They nodded. Yi Xian smiled and said, now I order you to kill all of those people and place their heads in front of the main hall of the Mausoleum of Ways. The 10 of them bowed slightly, turned around and left. Meng Wan was just about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly said, Miss Meng Wan, I don't need you. Meng Wan gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian gazed at Meng Wan. I'd thought that Miss Meng Wan would be different, but now it would seem like you're the same. As he spoke, he gazed at Zhou Xian and the others. Is Bailey too very terrifying? All of them nodded with extremely solemn expressions on their faces. Yi Xian pointed at himself. Remember, my name is Yi Xian and I'll allow all of you to understand what true terror is. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Zhou Xian and the others exchanged glances and then they followed him. Meng Wan had a gloomy expression on his face and no one knew what he was thinking. The 10 Dao breakers did not disobey Yi Xian's orders. They really killed all of the 70-odd people and brought their heads before the hall of the Dao Mound. They were placed neatly. For a moment, all the experts of the North Abyss were shocked. All of the 70-odd people had been killed under Yi Xian's orders. Countless experts arrived before the hall of the Dao Mound, cursing incessantly. Some even sought an audience with Qian Yaoyao, requesting that Yi Xian's position as commander be immediately removed, and that Yi Xian be killed to appease everyone's anger. In the hall, Qian Yaoyao was leisurely drinking tea and no one knew what she was thinking. At this moment, a woman entered the hall. It was Meng Wan. Qian Yaoyao looked at Meng Wan. He asked you to come back? Meng Wan nodded. Qian Yaoyao smiled. Why? Meng Wan said in a low voice. He wanted to kill those 70-odd people but I didn't agree so he asked me to come back. Qian Yaoyao smiled. What did I say to you before you left? Meng Wan suddenly raised her head and in the next moment she slowly knelt down. Your Majesty. Qian Yaoyao slowly closed her eyes. I treat you like a younger sister but you've forgotten your status. Go back to the Dao Mound. This place is not suitable for you. Hearing this, Meng Wan said in a trembling voice. Your Majesty, can you? Qian Yaoyao looked at Meng Wan. Do you know why he killed those 70-odd people? Meng Wan shook her head. Qian Yaoyao said softly. What is the greatest problem of the Dao Mound? Fear. Fear of the White Cloak Army, fear of the White Cloak Army. As she spoke, she walked to the entrance of the hall, and looked at the people who were still cursing Zhou Xian outside. Her lips curled into a mocking smile. Look, even now many people are still cursing Zhou Xian, but they've overlooked the fact that those 70-odd people fled without a fight. Why have they overlooked it? Because in their eyes, we should have lost against the White Cloak Army so it's normal for those people to flee without a fight. After all, the White Cloak Army is so powerful. At this point, Qian Yaoyao looked towards the horizon, a trace of excitement in her eyes. I really like this Zhou Xian more and more. Chapter 1374. Mount Mang. At this moment, the doubting had occupied Mount Mang. Zhou Xian led the 30-plus experts up into the sky above Mount Mang. Besides them, the 10 Dao breakers were there as well. Zhou Xian looked down at Mount Mang from midair and no one knew what he was thinking. Li Jin and the others were looking at Zhou Xian from behind Zhou Xian. They'd naturally heard of Zhou Xian. After all, Zhou Xian had led the geniuses of the Dao Tomb to annihilate Guanshan and the others from the doubting. However, Bailey too wasn't Guanshan. He was an extraordinary expert who'd made a name for himself. Could Zhou Xian defeat Bailey too? Suddenly, a powerful aura shot into the sky from Mount Mang, and then a man appeared in front of Zhou Xian and the others. The man sized up Zhou Xian's group and was about to speak when Zhou Xian suddenly stabbed with his sword. The man's head flew into the air while blood sprayed. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. He killed him just like that. He didn't even make any opening remarks. Zhou Xian sheathed his sword. Meanwhile, a ray of blood-red light suddenly shot into the sky from Mount Mang, and there was a blood-red blade within it. Li Jin and the others had solemn expressions on their faces when they witnessed this scene. The madman Bailey too. In midair, Zhou Xian suddenly stabbed with his sword and a ray of cold light flashed. Bang! The blood-red light was instantly blasted apart, and an expanse of blood-red light surged through the sky. Meanwhile, a man appeared in front of Zhou Xian. The man's upper body was bare, his long hair hung loosely on his shoulders, and he held a blood-red blade that seemed like it was condensed from blood. Bailey too. People called him a madman. There were over 30 more people standing behind Bailey too, and every single one of them emanated a powerful aura of slaughter. It was obvious that they were iron-blooded warriors. The White Cloak Army. Li Jin and the others who stood behind Zhou Xian were simply like the difference between the heavens and the earth when compared to these 30 people. Not just his strength but his temperament as well. Bailey too looked at Zhou Xian and smirked. You're Yi. Before he could finish speaking, Zhou Xian suddenly disappeared from where he was. Bailey too was stunned. They're going to make a move just like that? Aren't you going to start with a verbal attack? Bailey too did not think too much. He raised the bloody saber in his hand and slashed forward. A bloody light instantly flooded the sky. Within this bloody light, there was an extremely terrifying evil aura and killing intent. Li Jin and the others behind Zhou Xian had a drastic change in expression as they retreated rapidly. It was because they were unable to resist the murderous and vicious auras, not even at the edge. The 10 Dao breakers did not retreat, nor did the 30 people behind Bailey Tuesday. Right at this moment, Zhou Xian suddenly stopped and a mysterious force suddenly appeared. Blood Realm. The instant the Blood Realm appeared, the sea of blood was instantly absorbed by him, including the evil qi and killing intent. Everyone here was stunned at the sight of this and it included Bailey too. Bailey too gazed at Zhou Xian with slight disbelief. How could this be possible? Zhou Xian slowly closed his eyes. At this moment he was quite excited, because he noticed that he was most suitable for the battlefield. Especially the battlefield. How much killing intent, evil energy and blood was there in the battlefield? But he could absorb all of them. Bailey too stared fixedly at Zhou Xian from afar. At this moment, there was a solemn expression in his eyes. He was naturally aware of Zhou Xian. It could be said that the doubting's hatred towards Yi Xian still existed within the Dao tomb. Meanwhile, Yi Xian opened his eyes. His eyes were completely blood red, and when coupled with his white hair, Yi Xian seemed like a demon. Yi Xian gazed at Bailey too while his left thumb suddenly pressed against the hilt of his sword, and his sword trembled slightly. Bailey too suddenly vanished on the spot. A moment later he appeared above Yi Xian and he slashed down with his saber. There were no flashy movements, it was just a simple slash. Yi Xian didn't defend himself and he stabbed with his sword instead. Bang! Under everyone's gaze, Yi Xian's sword pierced through Bailey Tu's chest. At the same time, Bailey Tu's saber struck Yi Xian's head. Yi Xian's entire body shook violently. At this moment, cracks appeared on his head. However, his physical body had forcefully withstood this saber. But Bailey Tu hadn't been able to resist Yi Xian's sword. Bailey Tu stared fixedly at Yi Xian, an injury in exchange for a life. As he spoke, his figure gradually became ethereal. He'd lost. He hadn't lost in terms of ruthlessness, he'd lost in terms of physical strength. It's over? All of the experts present were dumbfounded. The two of them had only exchanged 2 blows as soon as they'd met, and then the battle was over? The 30-odd people behind Bailey Tu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. None of them retreated. Yi Xian suddenly turned around to look at the dumbfounded Li Jin and the others. What are you waiting for? Li Jin and the others came to their senses. They looked at the 30-odd White Cloak Army soldiers hesitantly. They were still afraid of the White Cloak Army. Yi Xian suddenly said, "If you're afraid, then you'll lose for the rest of your life." Li Jin and the others fell silent. Yi Xian looked at Li Jin and the others. "If you have balls, then you're a man." "What is a man?" "Men can cry, they can lose, they can even die, but they can't cower. And now look at yourselves. Can you even call yourselves men?" Li Jin and the others had ugly expressions on their faces. Yi Xian's words were as sharp as a blade. But none of them dared to move. The 10 Dao Breakers were just about to attack when Yi Xian stopped them. These Dao Breakers were no weaker than the White Cloak Army soldiers, both in terms of strength and mentality. He wanted to train Li Jin and the others. Yi Xian couldn't help but sigh when he saw that Li Jin and the others weren't going to make a move. It was like when someone bullied you in the secular world and you felt that you couldn't beat him, so you didn't dare fight back. But did you think that bullying you would end after one time? No. He would continue to bully you. Why? Because he thought you were easy to bully. And as long as you fought back, even if you lost, he wouldn't dare bully you again. Because you weren't that easy to bully. He'd understood this very well back in Qingqing. One could lose, one could die, but one could never be a coward. If you dare bully me, I'll beat you to death. If I can't beat you, that's fine. I'll beat you every time you come at me, and I'll beat you again. Li Jin and the others didn't even have the courage to make a move. Strength? Actually, Li Jin and the others were at the Dao validation realm as well, and their cultivations weren't any lower than the White Cloak Army soldiers. However, they were just like some people in the secular world. They were clearly no weaker than others, but they still didn't dare fight back. Yi Xian gazed at Li Jin and the others. The doubting and I are mortal enemies, but now I respect the White Cloak Army while I look down on all of you. A strong person challenging a weak person isn't something to be proud of. A weak person challenging a strong person is a true man. Leave and return to Dao Burial Mound City. Because you aren't worthy of following me, Yi Xian. I, Yi Xian, don't associate myself with a bunch of weaklings. Li Jin and the others had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces when they heard Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Li Jin suddenly stepped forward and grinned fiercely. Brothers, let's fight for our dignity. Today we'll show Yi Xian that we aren't weaklings. At worst, we'll just die. What's there to be afraid of? As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. Behind Li Jin, the rest of the people also rushed out. Meanwhile, the White Cloak Army didn't flee. Even though they were afraid of Yi Xian, not a single one of them fled. As soon as Li Jin and the others charged forward, the 30+ others attacked as well. It didn't take long for the battle to begin. However, Li Jin and the others were immediately suppressed as soon as the battle began. There was still a gap in their strength. It didn't take long for the members of the Dao burial mound to start dying. Yi Xian still didn't show any intention of attacking. He didn't feel pity for them. After all, none of them, including Yi Xian, had come to the celestial abyss to play around. They had to be prepared to be killed at any moment here. More and more experts of the Dao burial mound were falling, but Yi Xian still showed no intention of attacking. If this continued, then it would only take an hour at most for the members of the Dao burial mound to be annihilated. But up until now, not a single member of the White Cloak Army had died. Yi Xian just watched. He was waiting for the moment when Li Jin and the others only had the will to fight and no fear in their eyes. At this moment, while there was the will to fight in their eyes, there was still fear. That was exactly why Li Jin and the others hadn't completely forgotten about life and death. What were they waiting for? They were waiting for Yi Xian to attack. As far as Li Jin and the others were concerned, Yi Xian would definitely attack. Since the beginning, they'd been placing their hopes on Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and left with the 10 Dao breakers. Li Jin and the others were stunned when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian left? He left. At this moment, some of them suddenly collapsed. The 6 experts of the Dao burial mound had immediately turned around and fled. They'd been waiting for Yi Xian to attack. After all, Yi Xian was their hope. Because they knew that they were absolutely unable to defeat the White Cloak Army. However, they hadn't expected that Yi Xian would just leave. Forget about them. There was no hope left. Many had fled. However, over a dozen hadn't fled. After Yi Xian left, they knew that they would definitely die today. Since they were going to die, then they intended to drag one of them down with them. Meanwhile, Li Jin suddenly roared madly with laughter. Even if I die, I'll change to another. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. At this moment, he was prepared to die. The others were the same. At this moment, the aura they emanated was completely different. When one didn't even fear death, that was the moment one transformed. Who wasn't afraid of death on the battlefield? Only those who weren't afraid of death wouldn't die so easily. When enemies met on a narrow path, the courageous would definitely win. Suddenly, a ray of light appeared here. As soon as it appeared, the head of an expert from the White Cloak Army flew up into the air. A moment later, rays of light crisscrossed through the White Cloak Army, and then the sound of slashing resounded incessantly. Every single slash resounded and an expert perished. The expressions of the experts from the White Cloak Army changed drastically, and they hurriedly moved closer. However, that ray of light tore through their formation with extreme ease. A short while later, over 30 experts from the White Cloak Army were lying on the ground. Even though they weren't a match for Yi Xian, it wasn't very possible for Yi Xian to instantly annihilate them. However, it was entirely possible when the Dao breakers were included. Yi Xian put his sword away and walked over to Li Jin and the others. At this moment, only 12 of them remained and all 12 of them were heavily injured. Yi Xian gazed at Li Jin and the others. From this moment onward, all of you will follow me. Right at this moment, an extremely powerful aura suddenly appeared in the distant horizon. Yi Xian frowned slightly as he looked up into the sky. One of the Dao breakers by his side spoke solemnly. I just received news that the Daoting has dispatched reinforcements. It's the #1 general of the White Cloak Army, Fu Su. He's the #1 expert of the White Cloak Army and he's extremely courageous. He paused for a moment before he continued. He's brought 300 White Cloak cavalry with him. They're the most elite cavalry of the White Cloak Army, and they can be said to be the most elite cavalry of the Daoting. Besides that, there are also 6 Divine Monarch Realm experts. Anyone who could be conferred the title of Divine Monarch was a Dao Defense Realm expert. Yi Xian suddenly turned around and gazed into the distance. We'll have to pay more. Li Jin and the others were stunned. Dao Tomb City. Within a hall. Qian Yaoyao sipped her tea slowly in silence. Yi Xian continued, the price is right. Doubting is useless. Qian Yaoyao stopped. Peace will have to pay more. Chapter 1375. Inside the hall, Qin Yaoyao remained silent. Yi Xian suddenly turned around and left. He wasn't heading towards Mount Mang. Meanwhile, Qin Yaoyao suddenly said, 40% of the profits from Mount Mang's top-grade mine. Yi Xian stopped, turned around and walked towards Mount Mang. Within the hall, Qin Yaoyao looked outside the hall. Can you do it? Yi Xian didn't even turn around. What do you mean? Qin Yaoyao was stunned and then she shook her head with a smile. Interesting. As she spoke, she got up and walked out of the great hall. At this moment, the experts of the Dao Tomb hurriedly came before Qin Yaoyao. One of them said in a low voice, Celestial Monarch, that Yi Xian is inhumane. He actually killed so many people of our Dao Tomb. Qin Yaoyao suddenly punched out. Bang. The old man hadn't even finished speaking when he was blasted into nothingness. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Xianxia looked at the crowd and smiled. Come on, continue. How could they dare to speak? Xianxia glanced at them and smiled. Of all the things I can't do, I'm number one in internal strife. Send down my order. Anyone who dares to flee without a fight will be killed without mercy. Also, everyone here today will be dismissed and immediately returned to the Dao tomb. The expressions of everyone here changed drastically when they heard this. Return to the Dao tomb? Was she trying to drive them away? The heavenly monarch's expression gradually turned cold. If you're still here in 10 breaths of time, I'll make you disappear completely. The experts hurriedly retreated when they heard Xianxia. Xianxia slowly closed her eyes. Send down my order. All unparalleled experts are to head to Mount Mang immediately. Once there, Yi Xian will be the new commander of the unparalleled army. Seeing Yi Xian is like seeing me. Unparalleled. She only had 500 bodyguards. Although they couldn't compare to Dao breakers, they were the elites of the elites. It didn't take long for over 500 powerful auras to soar into the sky from the Dao tomb city and head towards Mount Mang. Xianxia opened her eyes and looked into the sky as she chuckled. What a good, the price is right, the Dao court will be crippled. What an interesting little fellow. Mount Mang. When Yi Xian entered Mount Mang, he immediately sensed the pure aura of a divine crystal. A top grade or vein. At this moment, greed rose in Yi Xian's heart. If the fifth dimension also had this kind of top quality or vein, then the fifth dimension would also have more experts. Most importantly, this kind of top quality or vein would also bring great benefits to the fifth dimension, because the spirit chi was pure. In the current fifth dimension, although the spiritual chi had recovered a lot, it had not completely recovered. In particular, the amount of origin chi in the fifth dimension was extremely small, and this origin chi was not something that could be solved with a few spiritual veins. Although he was tempted, he knew that he couldn't covet the supreme grade spiritual vein now because neither the Dao Ting nor the Dao Tomb would give it to him. He had to take it slow. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly turned around. Not far away from him stood a man in a black robe, holding a folding fan in his hand. The expressions of the Dao breakers by Yi Xian's side gradually became solemn when they saw the person who'd arrived. Fu Su couldn't be compared to Bailey too because he was a core existence in the Dao Ting. There were 6 old men behind Fu Su. 6 divine monarchs. All of them were at the peak of the Dao control realm. Moreover, there was a group of cavalry in the sky behind the 6 old men. The white-robed cavalry. Yi Xian glanced at Fu Su and said, all of you move aside. Li Jin and the others glanced at Yi Xian and then they moved to the side. At this moment, even though there was a solemn expression in their eyes, there was no fear. The Dao breakers had moved to the side as well. Fu Su gazed at Yi Xian from afar and smiled. Young Master Yi, I've heard of your name a long time ago. I finally get to meet you today. Yi Xian glanced at the group behind Fu Su and then he smiled. A one-on-one battle or a group battle? Fu Su gazed at Yi Xian. A one-on-one battle. It should be a one-on-one battle. What about a group battle? Yi Xian smiled. I'll fight all of you. As soon as these words were spoken, Li Jin and the others were stunned. A group battle? Is he serious? The Dao breakers gazed at Yi Xian as well and they were extremely shocked. Yi Xian wants to fight all of them? Fu Su gazed at Yi Xian from afar and the smile on his face had vanished. Was Yi Xian confident or did he have a backup plan? Fu Su shook his head. While Yi Xian was a monster, it was impossible for him to defeat all of them. It was a trap. Fu Su glanced at the surroundings but he didn't notice anyone else. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, don't worry, there's no one else. With that he walked towards Fu Su with his sword in hand. As he walked, Yi Xian's body gradually turned red. The power of his bloodline. Yi Xian used the power of his bloodline. But he did not go completely mad. After activating the power of his bloodline, a powerful killing intent swept out like a tide. Li Jin and the others changed expression and retreated. Even the Dao breakers were forced to retreat. This killing intent was so terrifying that it could mess with their minds. It could be said that Bailey Tu's killing intent was like the difference between heaven and earth compared to Yi Xian's killing intent. One kill to prove the Dao. When Yi Xian had entered the Dao, he had used killing to prove the Dao, not the sword. It could be said that Yi Xian's killing intent was above his sword essence. Of all those who had used killing to prove the Dao, only Yi Xian had survived. Killing intent, bloodline power and the sword spirit. The present Yi Xian could be said to be very terrifying. In this state he could even fight an expert like the true martial divine lord. Seeing Yi Xian suddenly enter such a state, Fu Su suddenly said, "Retreat." Finishing, he and the people behind him retreated like the tide. Retreat. Li Jin and the others were dumbstruck. They retreated just like this? At this moment Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Soon the power of the bloodline in his body gradually calmed down. After a while Yi Xian returned to normal. Yi Xian looked at the sky. No one knew what he was thinking. He had not expected Fu Su to suddenly retreat. Yi Xian turned and left after a moment of silence. Seeing this, Li Jin and the others hurriedly followed. At a certain horizon, Fu Su looked in the direction of Mount Mang. No one knew what he was thinking. At this time an old man suddenly appeared next to him and said gravely, "Retreating like this will affect our morale." Fu Su looked at the old man. "Elder Zhang, do you think the true martial divine lord and white emperor star sovereign are powerful?" Elder Zhang stilled and then said, "Of course. True martial divine lord. The commander of all the armies in Celestial Abyss. It could be said that even white robes had to listen to his orders. As for White Emperor Star Sovereign, while he was not very good at fighting, his status in the doubting was very high. He had appointed some of the doubting positions. These two, one civil and one martial, were the left and right arms of the Dao ancestor. At this time Fu Su said softly, "White Emperor Star Sovereign and true martial divine lord attach great importance to him, and think that he is a great enemy of our doubting. I have investigated this person. This person once fought his way into our doubting. Even Divine General Quan Bi died at his hands. Also he challenged the true martial divine lord before. While he lost, he did not die." As he spoke he slowly closed his eyes and he pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "This person's strength is invincible in the Dao proving realm, and there are few in the Dao control realm who are a match for him. Especially when he enters that legendary state of madness, ordinary Dao control realm cultivators are utterly no match for him. If we had attacked just now, there would only be one result: great losses. Also, according to what I know, this person can grow in slaughter because he can absorb blood and his sword can absorb souls. Speaking of the sword, I almost forgot that his soul-suppressing sword has reached Dao defense realm." His voice was solemn. The old man said gravely, "But if we retreat like this?" Fu Su smiled lightly and said, "Face is not important. What is important is not to make unnecessary sacrifices." The old man looked at Fu Su. "What do you plan to do next?" "Mang Mountain cannot be given away." Fu Su said softly, "Elder Zhang, it is not about the supreme grade spirit vein now. It is about this Yi Xian. White Emperor Star Sovereign and True Martial Star Sovereign are right to worry. This Yi Xian will become a great threat to our doubting in the future. This person must die here. I have already sent people back to ask the Divine General. Everything will be decided by him." Elder Zhang nodded slightly. As though thinking of something, he suddenly said, "Fu Su, if you fight this person, what are your chances of victory?" Fu Su shook his head. "No chance." Elder Zhang was shocked. "How?" Fu Su said softly, "If I had a 30% chance of victory, I would have fought him just now. But I don't even have half, much less 30. Regardless of whether our doubting admits it or not, he is the first of the younger generation in 100 years. Elder Zhang was silent. Fu Su seemed to have thought of something and his expression gradually turned grave. If this person really joins the Dao tomb, it is not a good thing for our doubting. At this time, a man suddenly appeared in front of Fu Su. The man bowed slightly to Fu Su. "Divine General greets the commander." "Divine General." Fu Su nodded. "Let's go." Finishing, he and the man disappeared. The news that Yi Xian had scared off the white-robed cavalry quickly spread throughout Heaven Realm Abyss. Yi Xian. This name could be said to be known by everyone in this Heaven Realm Abyss now. Everyone knew it. In Dao Tomb City, Ying Yao Yao sat on the stone steps of the hall with her legs crossed. Her eyes were slightly closed, thinking about something. She already knew about Mount Mang. This matter also shocked her a little. She had not expected that Fu Su would choose not to fight. Of course, she had not expected that Yi Xian would dare to fight Fu Su and the others alone. After a long silence, Ying Yao Yao opened her eyes. She looked towards the horizon and said softly, "White robes, it's getting more and more fun. What do you think?" Mount Mang. Yi Xian came to the interior of Mount Mang. The interior of Mount Mang was a supreme grade spirit vein. This spirit vein could produce more than 100,000 fortune divine crystals in a year. More than 100,000. This was something that could nurture many Dao verification and Dao defense experts. Yi Xian glanced around and then turned around to leave. There were some fortune divine crystals inside, but he did not take them. There was no meaning in taking away a few fortune divine crystals. Outside Mount Mang, more than 500 people suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The man in the lead bowed respectfully to Yi Xian. By the orders of the Celestial King, from this moment onwards, we will obey young Master Yi. Yi Xian sized up the 500 people and said, "Doubting, where is the nearest supreme grade spirit vein?" The man stilled and then said, 1,000 li to the south, Mount Politburo. Yi Xian looked up at the horizon. What benefits do I get from taking a supreme grade spirit vein? Dao Tomb City in front of the hall, Ying Yaoyao looked at the horizon. What benefits do you want? Yi Xian stretched out 4 fingers. 40%. Ying Yaoyao stood up and looked at the horizon. 30%. It is not that I am unwilling, but it is not good for you if I take too much. Yi Xian was silent for a moment. Fine. But I need you to do me a favor. Ying Yaoyao smiled. Fine. Yi Xian asked, aren't you going to ask what it is? Ying Yaoyao smiled. You are a person who knows what to do. Yi Xian did not say anything else and left with the group.